In an apparently empty world, a massive rock impact takes place. A giant stone monster attacks the humans. They are in a dungeon, facing a golem. The team leader gives instructions to his men, and tells them what they need to do. Then they attack the golem, this time in a more coordinated way. However, the golem becomes furious and increases its power. The group leader quickly tells them to use their resistance amulets. The group's mage gets ready. He calls the attention of the mana caster in the group, and asks if his mana is running low. That's our protagonist. His name is Haruto, and he says yes. But he quickly uses his skills, specifically to focus his mana, and transfer it to the mage, who says now he'll be able to take down the golem. The enemy approaches the mage. He takes the opportunity to strike, and hits the golem dead on. After defeating the enemy, they rest. The leader says Haruto didn't help much today, and tells him to at least help with dismantling. One of them asks if Haruto is a trafficker, since he's only providing support from behind. Another says he has no skills, but can generate infinite mana. The first guy is soon impressed, saying that's an amazing skill, but asks what's the point of it, since even mages and healers have mana absorption abilities. Unless it's a fight against a boss that needs a ton of mana, it's practically useless. They say that's why Haruto is still at level 30 even after 5 years as a hunter. No matter how low it is, the start of a hunter is higher than others. Haruto thinks they're speaking loudly on purpose, but also thinks that regardless of anything, he won't give up. But when he arrives at the Dagon Guild headquarters, he's shocked and asks what's going on, because suddenly the director wants him, a hunter, to work in the production department. The director says he might not know, but there's no one left who wants to hunt with Haruto. But at level 29, solo hunting is impossible. Haruto has no useful skills, and the only one he does have is infinite mana. Haruto says that at least he's providing enough mana to hunt, and if he pushes a little more, he says he'll reach level 30. The director says that even healers and mages have mana absorption skills, and they don't help most groups much. He asks what difference reaching level 30 would make. He also says the guild has thought long and hard about it, and says Haruto's ability is better suited for the mana potion division, helping with production. But Haruto asks what would happen if he refused to do that. In that case, the director apologizes, but says they can't keep someone in the guild who has hit a growth barrier. And just like that, the protagonist became unemployed overnight. His known skill is to provide infinite mana to his party members. But his real ability, which he kept hidden, is quite unique. Surprisingly, he acquired this skill even before becoming a hunter. The protagonist uses his system that allows him to duplicate items, so the onigiri he was about to eat, multiplied into 2, this skill allows him to copy and paste a target. It's an unprecedented ability, so after awakening as a hunter, he had high hopes. But it didn't take long to realize it was a bad skill, because it only works with him. The moment it leaves his hand, it disappears like a mirage, so copying money to resell becomes useless. Even more annoying is that there's a level restriction for copying equipment. He sees a dagger and realizes its retina is insufficient to copy the target. Even the so-called infinite mana generation is just him copying and pasting the tiny amount of mana he absorbed. Once pasted, the mana doesn't disappear and is transferred to another hunter. He tried copying skills, but it always required rare monster materials. Haruto thinks that if he could just level up a bit more and copy some high-level equipment, he could walk around fully geared during hunts. He also wants to reach level 30 because he wants to acquire a sword called Collegia Dragons. This sword has 2 exclusive skill slots and a bonus defense effect. What makes this sword even more unique is that it has its own level. Once wielded, the person instantly gains a 200 level boost. Haruto wants this sword because it can be equipped starting at level 30, and with it he could quickly jump to level 230, making it more than crucial. It will be displayed in Korea in a week because its durability dropped and it's no longer functional as a weapon, so they're probably just showcasing it for profit. But for Haruto, this is a golden opportunity, just one touch, and he can copy it infinitely. All he needs is to level up one more time. A few days later, the protagonist heads to a dungeon. His group faces some giant spiders, until one of the members requests mana, and the protagonist provides it to him. And with his mana restored, the group member uses his fire skills to burn the spiders. Haruto realizes that level really is everything, as this teammate is on a whole different level of power. Haruto checks his system, and a group member asks if he thinks leveling up like this is really going to work. He replies that he has to prepare something before the boss fight. Park Hae-young asks what he needs to prepare, says the protagonist just has to make sure he pays for the bus ride later, and also the beer. Park joined these unofficial hunts for money. Even in an unregistered hunt, Haruto managed to catch a ride on a high-level dungeon bus. The leader says that as soon as dismantling is done, they're leaving, because the boss room is up ahead, and they need to finish this hunt and grab a drink, until he sees a giant spider and tells the others to stop. She's Alexa, the dungeon's boss spider. The protagonist finds the spider intimidating and thinks that with just one move, she could kill him. But Park says he's not even fighting and asks why he's so scared. He also says hunting a spider is easy, but there's something to be careful about. First is that web. Once you're caught, even a level 200 monster can't move, and those eggs in the nest, if they break, the giant spider becomes furious. So he tells the protagonist to keep an eye on them. When the giant spider gets angry, it's scarier than any other monster, until another group member snaps, saying now's not the time for a tutorial, because they don't have time right now. And besides, after splitting the bus fare, there's barely anything left anyway. But due to a careless move, he ends up kicking a rock into one of the webs, waking the spider immediately, who becomes furious and starts attacking right away. The others call him an idiot for doing that. The group's tank tells the others to step back and takes the group's defense. He also tells them to be careful with the eggs and webs to manage the situation. The group then takes battle positions and faces the spider. Haruto thinks they're bringing down the giant spider like it's just a mosquito, and if this works out, he might even reach level 35 just from the giant spider, until the tank says the spider is shooting webs and tells the others to be careful. The mage says they probably never hunted spiders before and says he'll use fire magic to scare her off. The spider shoots its webs and the mage fires his flames at her, but the mage's fireball gets blocked by the web. This makes the mage feel humiliated and he wants to keep firing until it breaks through. But the protagonist tells him to wait a moment, because all he needs to do is hit the fireballs repeatedly. The tank says the mage is going to end up hitting the eggs at this rate, but the protagonist says it's already too late. He sees the eggs are already cracking. Soon the tank tells the others to run, because the spider is about to go berserk, but he himself gets hit by a web. Then Park tells the protagonist to get behind a pillar to hide, because they need to protect themselves from the webs. Meanwhile, the spider becomes extremely furious. Webs are shot in every direction. The mage is terrified because his fireballs don't reach the webs. He sees the spider approaching. Soon he realizes that his end is near, and he screams in fear and desperation. It's all useless as the spider easily crushes him. The protagonist is also trapped and can barely move. The spider approaches him too, and Haruto thinks he was just trying to play it safe with low-level dungeons, and now he's about to die just for going one level higher, until the spider attacks him. Hanjin screams in pain and coughs up blood, losing all hope of survival. In the middle of the protagonist's despair, while the spider pierces his body, his system asks if he would like to copy and paste the content. That way, Haruto copies his own body and manages to escape the trap. Other things may disappear when he copies and pastes them, but he doesn't. This is why, inside a dungeon, Haruto makes a copy of himself as a precaution. Just like in a game, if he dies, he's automatically pasted back and the previous corpse disappears. But no matter how many times he does this, he can't get used to seeing himself dead somewhere else. Even so, this is what he can do to save himself. But suddenly, he's attacked by the spider again, forcing him to make another copy of himself. This way, Haruto realizes that no matter how many times he can copy himself, if he doesn't get out of there, none of it will matter. Until suddenly, he hears one of his teammates and realizes that Park Ki-young is still alive. The protagonist feels sorry, but he can't save him now. He sees the spider approaching and hides. The spider heads toward his companion, and he feels bad about it. So he decides he can't let Park die like that, and attacks the spider, stopping her from advancing. However, his strength is nothing compared to the spider's, but at least he managed to stop her from attacking Park. Right then, his system alerts him that he leveled up, surprising him. Haruto can't believe that in the middle of all this, he managed to level up, and wonders if it was thanks to his attack. But in a moment of distraction, he gets hit from behind, forcing him to multiply again. Meanwhile, he can only think that now that he leveled up, all he needs to do is paste the Calisia Dragon's Longsword. So he tells the spider that even if he can't escape, he will kill her, even if he has to multiply himself an infinite number of times. He also says that even if he only makes a small scratch, that's enough. Now it's a race against time, against the fat spider. However, 3 days later, and after several consecutive deaths, he's still fighting, but now all the available weapons are broken, and the protagonist doesn't have many alternatives. On the other side, he sees a giant spider that keeps getting stronger. Luckily for the protagonist, she doesn't have regenerative abilities, but the spider's attack abilities are very strong, especially when it comes to her webs. While dodging the web shots, Haruto thinks that he had to visit the afterlife 4 times because of that spider silk. He dodges the enemy's attacks and takes the opportunity to climb the spider using one of her legs. That way, he comes face to face with her and tries to land a fatal blow to her head. But the spider was tougher than he expected, which is why the protagonist's sword broke on the spot. It was the last one he had, and not even his copy ability can help him now, because the spider is more than furious, staring at the protagonist like a persistent enemy. But then something unexpected happens. The spider's entire body starts to convulse, until she explodes. Haruto is beyond relieved as he finally managed to defeat the spider even as a low-level player. His system alerts that he leveled up again and even received a reward, but now he just wants to get out of there and take Park out for a drink. But his joy doesn't last long, because he is suddenly attacked by other spiders that appear. These are the ones that were in the eggs, and the time he spent in the dungeon was enough for them to hatch. Haruto knows he can clone himself, but the same can't be said for his friend, and because of that, he doesn't know what to do. The spider attacks him, and he tries to protect his friend. But something unexpected happens. The spider is split in half. The other spiders realize what happened, and rush toward the threat, as if they were seeking revenge against whoever did that. The hunter who appeared out of nowhere uses her skill called Hellfire to fight them. This is the strongest fire magic ability that exists, and only a few hunters in the world can launch such an attack. As far as the protagonist knows, only one person in his country can do it. She's a mage who also fights with blades. Because of that, she was nicknamed the Blade Witch, and she's ranked 5th in the country. Her name is Shinoda Nanase, and she asks if only the two of them survived. The protagonist says unfortunately yes. Nana sees that the baby spider emerged from the broken egg, and because of that, high-level players were wiped out due to its rage state. But one managed to survive inside a boss room and even saved his companion despite being a low-level hunter, so she wonders what the hell happened? Sometime later, they go to the Hunter Association headquarters, and the protagonist is taken to the investigation room. He thanks Nanas for the help, and also the supervisor who reported what happened. Nana says that it's just part of the association's job. She also says that she already sent the items and wrote the report, so he doesn't have to worry about anything else and is already cleared. Haruto is surprised as he didn't expect to be cleared so easily. But Nana says that, surprisingly, things like this happen all the time in dungeons, and many casualties occur in different ways. As for the dungeon buses, she says the association turns a blind eye to low-level hunters who pay for trips to difficult dungeons to level up. The desire to become stronger is a basic instinct for hunters, and although it's illegal, it's also a way to train them. Then Nanas asks if the protagonist has any further questions. After hearing all of this, Haruto feels satisfied and gets up to leave. Before he goes, Nanas says he'll receive his reward soon. However, Haruto tells her to deposit everything to his junior, the other survivor. Such an attitude surprises the association representative. She wonders why the protagonist did that, concluding that there really is something about him that sparks her interest. Little does she know, there's nothing noble about the protagonist. He simply didn't accept the deposit because he had already copied everything with his ability. The item was the web of the defeated spider. Back when he was still in the dungeon, the protagonist came across the reward but wasn't very pleased with what he received, since he got something small after a huge effort. Either way, he played it safe and copied the item, even without knowing how to use it, until the web disappears from his hand, and the protagonist panics, thinking he lost the reward. But then his system alerts him that the web was absorbed and can now be used by him. He himself doesn't understand the extent of his powers, and has just discovered he can copy enemy abilities and use them later however he wants. His system also reveals other options, that beyond possessing the spider's web, he can also manipulate it like its original owner, allowing him to weave webs to trap a target for a certain period of time. Haruto realizes this isn't as bad as he thought, since it allows him to do several things, so he decides to test it and traps an object in the web for 1 minute. With that, he knows that within the set time, the web trap won't disappear, and he could do whatever he wants during that window. After 1 minute, the web dissolves, and so the protagonist gains a better understanding of its possibilities. After performing other tests, he's absolutely sure how the ability works. He believes that now his options as a hunter are broader, and with that, he plans to go after the Collision Dragon Longsword to copy it. 2 hours earlier in Tokyo, on the Rainbow Bridge, a large vehicle speeds through traffic, and even though it's dangerous, it keeps full speed. Inside another vehicle, Moore Grant, one of the members of the International Hunter Association, talks to his partner. Her name is Arez Hu. He knows that Japan is the homeland of Arez's mother and asks how many times she's visited this country. Arez says she's been there 12 times, but claims her mother's homeland has nothing to do with her current visit. Moore says the sword's last exhibition location will be in Japan and asks if that's why her friend requested time off. She answers yes. She also says she's there because she wants to find something in a Japanese dungeon. Her friend says it would be cool if she found it and wishes her good luck, but Arez tells him to mind his own business or he might end up getting hurt one of these days. Right after, they receive information that the blue vehicle is about to leave the bridge, and due to an upcoming electromagnetic barrier, they'll lose communication for about 5 minutes. Moore looks up and thinks it's cool that the dungeon is above the sea, but Arez disagrees and simply says it'll be a huge disaster if the dungeon collapses. Moore says she's such a buzzkill. Arez says things like that are exactly what will get him hurt eventually. Meanwhile, Inside the Rainbow Bridge Dungeon Access Management Office, Shinoda Sattoru complains about having to enter a dungeon so early, and his friend tells him he shouldn't complain, since he's only there because of his connections. He also says it's not that easy to be part of this organization, until suddenly, a slime appears and stops in front of them. Sattoru says slimes like that are only found inside dungeons, but he's excited to find one outside. However, his friend says that's not a good thing and calls him a nudie. However, the slime isn't the only creature outside a dungeon, because right after, the hunters are caught by surprise, and they're shocked by what they see. After all, it's not every day that an ogre escapes from a dungeon and attacks them from the outside. Currently, outside the dungeon, the protagonist realizes that all his skill points increased after defeating the giant spider just a bit more, and he'll reach level 50. Hunters who pass level 50 generally have an easier time joining hunting parties, since monsters in intermediate dungeons are usually stronger. In those dungeons, it's possible to gain more experience points and rewards, and from time to time, rare items also appear, making it easier to level up. So the protagonist wonders if he should first make a copy of the parts from that giant spider king in sticks, until he sees a large number of hunters running and telling everyone to get out of the way. Haruto hears them talking about a collapsing dungeon, and he's surprised because he doesn't know what's going on. One of them says that the trailer carrying the legendary Longsword got caught in it, and an official request for cooperation from the International Hunter Association has been issued. With that, the protagonist realizes that the situation involves the sword he was after, and he finds himself cornered. Either way, at the top of the association building, an aerial transport vehicle lands. A member of the rescue team tells his companions that this mission is important, and their top priority is to protect the transport carrying the sword. But the team leader says she'll be the only one giving orders, and states that the main priorities of association hunters are defeating the monsters and rescuing any civilians. She also tells the hunter that this is an emergency, and they'll discuss it later. He even tries to argue with the leader, Nanase, but something catches her attention. The protagonist appears from a distance, begging to be taken along. Nana simply ignores him and says they need to leave, but Haruto insists, saying he saw everyone being sent on the mission. Until Nanas recognizes him, Haruto says he wants to help, even if it's just with civilian evacuation, because this is an emergency and they'll need all the help they can get. This way, he manages to convince the leader, and both board the aerial transport to the mission site. There, Nana says that the protagonist also prioritized helping his junior in the giant spider king's lair, and she's surprised by his altruistic instinct. But Haruto thinks she has no idea about his real motives. He's only there for personal gain. One of the team members finds it strange that the dungeon collapsed, since they had just stabilized it not long ago. But the leader says everything is strange in this world. Besides, a building that collapsed once and was rebuilt doesn't guarantee it won't collapse again. She claims that's why they're being deployed for this mission, to avoid a repeat of the great disaster from 15 years ago. Haruto knows exactly what she's talking about, the simultaneous outbreaks. A dungeon breach on a scale comparable to a natural disaster. When dungeon monsters aren't cleared regularly, the dungeon becomes saturated and collapses. When that happens, the monsters that escape the dungeons begin attacking civilians, turning it into hell. These are dungeon breaks. Haruto lost his parents in that disaster, and kept it a secret because it's hard for him to believe, but he saw a transcendent being from another dimension appear and curse him with that ability. That thing, called a curse, gave him a gift, and has only said one thing in 20 years. Haruto still doesn't know if it was talking about the expiration of his abilities, or about his lifespan. Even at this very moment, the sands of the cursed hourglass continue to fall. Back then, that being appeared because of the great disaster. It could mean that the day the being appears again, another great disaster will occur. There are only 5 years left until then. Haruto knows how to evolve his abilities. He wants to become the strongest hunter and find a way to stop this disaster, and maybe end his curse. Meanwhile, on Rainbow Bridge, monsters attack everything they see ahead, and chaos reigns over the place. The hunters present aren't enough to hold off the enemies. They have to fight while also trying to protect the people. Even though they struggle in combat, they try to do everything they can and cover for each other. Shinoda Sattoru and his friend are fighting together, but the boy is still inexperienced. That's why his friend tells him to be more careful with his back. Sattoru realizes that, just like before, his friend protected him now, and he's glad to know he can count on him. By the way, he asks about the reinforcements that were called, and his friend says that all communication was disrupted due to the dungeon's electromagnetic waves. But he's sure the organization noticed something strange and must have already sent someone to check it out. He also says they should cross the bridge. In that case, they might find the reinforcements sooner, because it's better to go that way than to be killed by the monsters there. Near the cargo truck, a King Beerman appears. Moore asks if the truck is safe. Arez understands his concern, but says her defense magic is top tier, and even if a level 400 monster attacks, it still wouldn't get through the defenses. However, the situation on the bridge is not looking good, as a new threat begins to rise. Everyone is terrified by what they see. Soon, Arez realizes that even the highest level of defense magic would be useless against this. The rescue team aircraft approach, until one of them alerts the team leader. Nanas, even being an experienced leader, is also frightened, because she sees that the monster on Rainbow Bridge is a Kushia. She instructs everyone to brace for impact. Like a dragon, Kushia breathes fire from its mouth. The impact of its attack destroys a large part of the bridge. What was already bad just got worse. However, seeing that the enemy destroyed nearly half of the bridge, the protagonist can only wonder if the Longsword is still safe. As the aircraft approach, the dragon breathes fire in their direction, even managing to hit one of the ships directly, forcing the crew to evacuate as quickly as possible. Nanas says this seems to be the dungeon's final boss and they need to change their initial strategy. For now, she orders the team to focus on attacking Kushia. But on the other hand, the leader doesn't see the protagonist among them and wonders where he is. Either way, she doesn't believe he's someone who would die so easily. And she also has other things to worry about, like defeating the dragon, for example. She uses her skill called Hellfire, something extremely powerful and amazing, something the protagonist hopes to copy one day. Speaking of him, Haruto has just landed at the site, using the spider abilities he previously copied. But unlike the others, he doesn't intend to fight, because his priority is to copy the Longsword of his dreams. On the other side of the bridge, another group approaches, and one of them informs their captain that the dragon Kushia has appeared, and then asks if this isn't dangerous. On the contrary, the captain says, it's perfect. He says Kang Ji-young and his team will be busy with the dragon, giving them a chance to go after the sword. He also says that while their opponents deal with the monsters and the dungeon breach, they'll sneak toward the sword without drawing anyone's attention. Back to the protagonist, he comes across several dead monsters on his path and notices it was the work of a hunter. The problem is that these monsters move in packs until he sees the hunters who did it. Shinoda Sattoru is struggling to face the monsters because they're on a higher level than him. His friend is down, injured, and says Sattoru doesn't know how to follow a simple order. He was told to run and not stay there, but Sattoru refuses to leave his friend behind. Haruto, in turn, realizes that they're hunters and thinks he shouldn't get involved. After all, he already has his own problems. Satoru's friend tells him to get out of there now because this dungeon is too dangerous and the monsters won't stop coming and they'll only get stronger until a new pack of wolves appears and Satoru realizes what his friend meant. Still, he doesn't give up, claiming that his senior gave his life to protect him, so he'll do the same and stay there until the end. The protagonist witnesses the whole scene. It reminds him of how, in the spider dungeon, he also sacrificed himself to help a friend. Either way, Satoru fights the wolves alone, but he doesn't tremble in the face of danger. Somehow, the current situation has given him more motivation to fight, and even made him more resilient. He dodges the enemy's attacks, while also launching his own, but he doesn't have eyes in every direction, which leaves him vulnerable to surprise attacks. But just before he could be hit, the protagonist appears to help him. Haruto strikes the wolf that was about to attack Satoru and asks if he's okay. He replies yes, but is still worried, because on the other side there are several wolves waiting for their turn to attack. Satoru thanks him for the help but says they should run now, since even high-level hunters have perished against these enemies. However, for the protagonist, this is perfect, which makes no sense to Satoru. Haruto says he hasn't tested this ability yet. Still, he thinks he can use the ability he copied from the spider against the wolves, and he's curious to see what kind of result it'll produce. It doesn't take long for the wolves to attack him. Satoru starts panicking. There are too many of them, unlike Haruto, who binds them using the spider webs. And even though there are many wolves, all of them end up trapped in the webs, until not a single one is left. Doing that even caused the protagonist to level up, but he wonders if it's because he used a binding skill that his level is going up slowly. It's amazing against mob swarms, but he wants to improve after linking them. Meanwhile, Satoru is impressed that all the wolves were defeated with a single ability. He's never seen anything like it before. His friend thanks the protagonist for the help and asks if he's a hunter sent by the organization. Haruto says yes, because he was on the same helicopter as them, so it's not a lie. Anyway, Satoru's friend asks if Haruto can return with him to the base. Satoru, however, doesn't want to leave his friend behind. The senior tries to convince him in every possible way, which makes the protagonist realize that this boy is really willing to die for his senior. And either way, both are in danger in this condition, which he regrets, but at the very least he wants to give them something. So the protagonist offers a healing potion, saying it won't leave the user in fighting condition, but at least it'll let him move again. The senior asks why the protagonist gave him something so expensive. Haruto says that he needs to get out of there along with his junior. Satoru, in turn, is amazed by this attitude, and thanks the protagonist immensely, saying that if he shares his name, the favor will be returned. But the protagonist says he doesn't need to give his name for that, and if Sattoru wants to repay the favor, he can do it right now. He says he's looking for a trailer from the International Association and asks the boy if he knows where it is. But upon hearing this, Sattoru is even more impressed. Speaking of the International Hunter Association, they're still fighting the same bear from earlier. Moore asks if Arez is going to put the monster to sleep again, and says it's impressive that a hunter doesn't resort to violence. Then he sees a projectile heading toward him, cutting through the air just before hitting him. Moore says there were definitely people aiming for the sword, and in this chaos, it's not like it's the first time he's fought thieves. On the other side, the enemy captain says his opponent is quick to react, and wants to see if he's good in combat too. Then he attacks, and Moore defends, saying he won't be defeated that easily. He also says he's the guardian of the transported item, so he won't let anyone get close to the cargo. Arez, however, tries to warn him about the danger, but Moore ends up being struck, and falls to his knees, not knowing what's happening. Arez says the enemies used a potion that blocks mana absorption, so she says if Moore tries to absorb mana, he'll die. The enemy captain says the mage didn't notice a thing and claims he's not underestimating anyone. He's simply doing what they always do. Arez says the enemies tried to make things easier by using poisonous items that the International Hunter Association strictly forbids on people. In that case, she says she won't make anything easy for them and will make their mission as difficult as possible. The enemies say using mana will only hasten her death and open the way for them to take what they want. But something catches the enemies by surprise. The bear that was attacking earlier returns and starts attacking them, using all its built-up rage. The bear strikes with no mercy, washing the ground with their blood, and tearing through bodies with its massive claws. The enemy captain says that this can't be happening. He just realized the mage only put the bear to sleep. She didn't kill it, which is why he needs to get out of there immediately. After that, the bear stands face to face with the two hunters. Moore says it's practically impossible to put that bear to sleep again. Arez comments that on top of that, her friend can't absorb mana. So Moore says that one day she would have to give up her vow of nonviolence, and that day is today, so she'll have to kill the beast. She says she'll do it, but not for him. After that, she runs toward the enemy, leaving her friend very worried, but the mage is determined. Even knowing she can't use mana, she does it anyway, and feels the cost of it in her body. She tries to stop the bear with magic, but when she sees the enemy is about to finish her off, she realizes this was a big mistake. Just when things seemed they were going to get worse, a light appears at the end of the tunnel. Several webs begin to entangle the bear, and even though it tries to use its fury, the strength of the webs restrains it and leaves it unable to keep fighting until the protagonist appears. Along with him, the other hunters too, who praise Haruto's work. Sattoru starts drooling over him and giving so many compliments that it embarrasses the protagonist. The excessive praise and thanks almost make Haruto regret having saved them. Either way, he goes up to the mage and asks if she's okay. He also asks if she's a hunter from the International Association. Arez doesn't know how to react. Unlike her, Moore asks the protagonist if he's also after the sword like the others. He lies, saying no, claiming he's only there to protect them. But Moore says he can't trust him, not after being attacked so many times. Haruto sees the countless bodies on the ground and realizes they too pursued the sword like he did, but were torn apart by the bear. And judging by the look on the international hunters' faces, they are not comfortable at all. Then Sattoru shows his hunter ID, saying they risked their lives to come there on behalf of the International Association and doesn't like their suspicion. The protagonist thinks that was a good move by the kid, and now it's his turn to make his own. So he offers 2 healing potions to the hunters, thinking this is just a small price to pay to win the replica of the Longsword. The 2 take the potions, still a bit suspicious. The mage, meanwhile, is still shaken by the bear, and sees that the creature, even wrapped in webs, is still alive. After that, other aircraft from the National Hunter Association arrive. Sattoru is happy, imagining they'll finally be safe. But his friend says the support team isn't there for them, because there's still a terrible dragon to face. Nanas orders her team to cease fire, because the enemy is about to enter Phase 3, which means it'll start unleashing area shockwaves. Now that the support guilds are here, they must stop until all citizens are evacuated, until someone shows up and asks when they'll be able to close the dungeon's interval. It's Kumahyam, and he says it's been a while since the last time. Nanas asks what he's doing there, until she can't believe what he has. Who prepares to attack, going against everything that was said. And now that Nanas realizes, she tells him to stop, because if he continues, he'll end up killing everyone and himself. He asks if Nanas is afraid of larvae, because during the last stabilization mission in the Ancient Bridge dungeon, he was furious that she and the association took all the credit for killing that thing. This time, he says he'll kill the dragon himself and make it spill all the loot from its body. The team leader senses the danger and orders everyone to fall back. Then the entire ground begins to shake, because the dragon falls onto the bridge and destroys a good portion of what was still standing. Even the protagonist gets into trouble, but thanks to his spider skill, he manages to escape. Not only that, but he also uses the webs to catch the others and prevent the cargo from falling into the sea. But that's not the only danger, it's just part of it. Since Haruto comes face to face with the dragon, he's shocked to see that the monster is dead, because he didn't think it would be that easy to do. Then Ku appears in front of him, saying he's surprised someone is still alive, and is even more surprised to see that the protagonist is just a low-ranked hunter, but praises him for that. Haruto sees an emblem on the man's neck, and notices it's the emblem of the Guild of the Future, the third largest in his country. He immediately asks if the priority wasn't to rescue the civilians and kill the monsters. But Ku doesn't seem interested in that. He says apparently all the civilians have already been rescued. But besides the dragon, another presence was bothering him, and he realizes it was the bear. He also sees the creature was wrapped in spider webs, and asks how the protagonist did that, with just a single touch on the monster. Ku takes down the bear in one blow. He sees the protagonist is restraining a high-level monster and holding up a trailer weighing tons, and wonders if he can capture a monster using only webs. Haruto, in turn, after witnessing Ku's strength, realizes that this guy could have taken down the dragon. Right after, he levels up, and Ku asks if he just wiped out the crowd of weaklings, since he didn't think the protagonist could handle webs and mobs at his current level, and accidentally stole his kill and got the reward. However, he says the reward is the bear's claw, and he doesn't need such trash, so he throws the claw to the protagonist. Haruto doesn't like that attitude at all, but before he can do anything, Nanas approaches. She thought Haruto had died, but feels relieved to see him. Ku is surprised they know each other, and says this is getting more and more confusing. Nanas asks what happened, but Haruto says it's nothing. She says the support team is evacuating civilians, and Haruto should join them, because when the enemy awakens, it'll launch an attack. The protagonist asks why not attack now. It seems like a good chance, but Nanas says unfortunately that's not possible. When a boss monster's HP drops below 1/3, it uses a move called Ultimate, either Berserk or another kind of attack. Both are wide-range attacks. Mid-bosses or lower bosses usually enter Berserk mode, in which case they focus only on the boss itself, so they don't break it into phases. A final boss like this dragon has a huge HP range and uses Berserk attacks, so they divide the battle into phases. During Phase 3, the boss feels threatened and launches a large-scale attack. Now the dragon will absorb all the mana around it while protecting itself. During this time, no physical or magical attacks will work. Right after, the dragon awakens and catches Nanas off guard. Ku, on the other hand, says he'll turn the dragon into a pinata before it can even breathe fire. Nanas says she trusts that the protagonist will survive again, but Ku says it'll be hard to survive this and tells him not to blame them if he dies, because low-ranked hunters dying in dungeons is more common than car accidents. Haruto thinks he didn't see that coming, but he believes he must be the one to kill the dragon. And to Ku he says that at the right time, he'll make him taste his own poison. After returning to the others, Sattoru says the protagonist saved him once again. Haruto tells Arez and more that he has a difficult task to do, and he'll need help. He says Kushia is in Phase 3 and about to use its devastating attack. If that happens, everything around will be destroyed. Besides that, they might not recover the trailer or the Longsword. That's why Haruto says he'll have to kill Kushia before that happens, but for that, he'll need the Kalisha sword from the dragon. He promises to return with it as soon as he completes the task. Moore says that's ridiculous. Believing he can defeat a monster like that alone is foolish, and besides, they don't even know him well. Haruto already imagined his words wouldn't convince them, but he knows he needs to reach the trailer before it gets destroyed. Arez says she needs a lot of mana to open the trailer, but she can't use it since she was poisoned by a potion from the previous enemies. Moore is surprised that she's even considering helping the protagonist, but the most surprising part is that he hears the protagonist say mana isn't a problem. Haruto says he's known in dungeons as a mana transporter, since one of his abilities is generating infinite mana. So he transfers the mana Arez needed, and she manages to use her powers. The transport truck becomes accessible, and the protagonist thanks her, saying he'll keep his promise. Moore asks why she did that, claiming Haruto might have bad intentions, but Arez says it's okay, because he tied up the bear without killing it earlier. His friend doesn't believe that's the reason she decided to trust the protagonist. Speaking of which, Haruto reaches the truck, thinking he'll finally get the sword he's longed for. Until, out of nowhere, the captain of the masked enemies appears and says he's been monitoring him the whole time, thanking the protagonist for granting access to the sword. After that, he attacks the protagonist, and hits him directly. Sattoru and his friend panic. Even the international hunters are shocked. The enemy goes to the sword at the back of the truck, and when he comes face to face with it, he says he didn't imagine things would end like this, but feels satisfied for having succeeded, until something catches him by surprise. The webs holding the truck on the bridge snap, causing the vehicle to crash straight into the sea. Underwater, the protagonist takes the opportunity to grab the sword and also to defeat the enemy. Since the enemy attacked him from behind, Haruto does the same. He didn't expect he'd get the sword this way, but he had saved his strength precisely for this moment, and now celebrates because the sword of his dreams is finally in his hands. Haruto wastes no time and makes a copy of the sword. However, he's surprised by his system, as it says he's at too low a level to duplicate this item. The protagonist is stunned, since he thought he'd need to be at level 30 for that, and now he's at level 50, so this shouldn't be a problem. Not only that, but the enemy gets back up and says that was a good try. He says he almost dishonored the name of the Blood Tower Guild and attacks the protagonist once more. After that, he heals himself and says that if it weren't for his regenerative ability, he'd be dead. But he's not satisfied with just taking the sword. The enemy wants to use it against the protagonist, wanting to repay the damage he suffered. He also says the protagonist will never see the light of day again, and besides that, he'll keep the sword of his dreams. Meanwhile, Haruto's system alerts that the sword has bonded with its wielder, and the system is automatically copying the sword's abilities. Haruto doesn't know exactly what's happening, but his system does all the work for him. Outside, the dragon is still causing trouble. Ku says the enemy is unleashing a wide area attack, and things have only gotten worse. Gushia was about to attack when something stirs in the sea. It apparently senses danger, but ends up being struck before it can do anything. With that, it's defeated, and even the experienced hunters are surprised. Later, at the Japanese Association building, one of the directors calls for a meeting, and says that due to the dungeon collapse at Rainbow Bridge, there were countless victims and extensive damage. The Hunters Association and several guilds responded quickly, resolving the situation in less than 2 hours, but criticism is increasing against the Dungeon Access Office for its negligence. He is Fua Tokyo, and says everyone doesn't need to worry so much because they are about to see how Kuishia is being handled. Taikuchi-gu says he heard that the association cleared the Rainbow Bridge dungeon about 3 months ago. Shinoda Makoto claims that performing a cleanup doesn't guarantee a collapse won't happen again. A discussion breaks out between them over whether or not the guild should act in such situations. Meanwhile, Nanas can only think about whether the protagonist managed to escape or not. Amid the chaos, Taikuchi-gu interrupts them and says what they really need is the boss respawn time, because he states it shouldn't have appeared for another 5 months. He asks if the hunter Nanas, who had been acting arrogantly and sneakily within the association, had actually failed to defeat the dragon back then, what would have happened? Nanas doesn't like that provocation, so until now calm and patient, she slams the table with such force that it breaks, and leaves everyone present frightened, except Ku, who already knows her reputation. The others ask what she's doing. Taikuchi, who provoked her, gets irritated by the way Nanas reacted, but Fua tells him to calm down. He also says his employee was rude, so he would like to apologize on her behalf. Taikuchi calls her insolent, claiming that if she keeps abusing her power, it will eventually turn against her. Nanas mentions that some people need to see to believe, and she thought it would be quicker to simply show what she wanted them to understand. And she states that what she just demonstrated is the reward she earned for defeating Kushia last time, its ability called Shockwave. She also says her master, Shirosaki, who contributed to subduing the dragon last time, can confirm this. Ku says he hasn't had time to analyze the rewards yet, but doubts it's a lie. Fua adds that due to Master Shirosaki's contributions, the damage was minimized. With that, everyone stands up and begins to applaud, but Ku is the only one who doesn't. He looks at Nanas and realizes what she's doing. Ku thinks she still holds a grudge against him for interfering earlier and wants to make sure she pays for it. And as for the one who stole the dragon, he's definitely going to hunt him down too. Nanas says that regarding the cause of the dungeon collapse, she will take responsibility and investigate personally. She will also question the guilds that delayed sending reinforcements, and since she has addressed everyone's concerns about her, she states that she will take her leave, until suddenly, Arez and more appear, and he says this meeting will continue, claiming he is from the International Hunters Association, and says he has an urgent message to share. Due to the dungeon collapse, the only collision dragon Longsword in the world was stolen during its exhibition transport in Japan. For that reason, he requests assistance to recover it as quickly as possible, and affirms that this is not a personal request, but one from his agency. Taikuchi asks if the trailer's security wasn't their responsibility, and claims he heard they themselves opened the trailer. Arez says that was done in cooperation with Hunter Shinoda Sattoru from the Great Sages Guild and Hunter Sana Haruto from the Japanese Hunters Association. This surprises everyone present, even the unshakable Kuma-hyum. Shinoda Makoto is quite disturbed to hear that Sattoru is involved, as he knows the boy comes from a good family. On the other hand, Fuwa says that in all Japanese organizations, there is no record of a member named Sano Haruto. Nanas, however, not only knows him, but is clearly bothered to hear this. At that moment, Ku thinks his revenge will come sooner than expected. He then asks if Arez is talking about the guy who tied up King Bierman with the giant king spider's thread, since he saw him causing trouble at the scene, but is surprised because he was convinced that he was a member of the Hunters Association. He then asks what Nanas knows about Haruto after all. He noticed the two of them are close. Elsewhere, the stolen sword is delivered to someone. A man wields it and takes a closer look. His name is Kurosaki Takumi, trafficker and leader of the Dark Guild Blood of the Tower. He sees that this is a sword that instantly increases its user's level by 200 and recognizes its user by the pattern on the hilt. He also says it was worth spending hundreds of millions to orchestrate that dungeon escape. The masked man then realizes that the guild master was truly behind the dungeon collapse. Takumi says it's a pity the masked man lost all his comrades. He apologizes to the master, saying that during the final operation, he encountered a strange man, but that he's definitely dead, and there's nothing to worry about. The master knows this and thanks him for the work. He also says that since he was the only one who survived, he'll get the full reward, and is now free to go and do whatever he wants. The masked man thanks him and says he can report that the mission was a success, but the master disagrees, saying that the mission was a failure. He states that this sword is unique, and no one would be foolish enough to sell it for just 1 billion. He immediately deduces that the masked man planned to profit by selling information about the sword. The masked man begs, saying that failing a mission in their guild means death, but he ends up realizing that in the end, the guild master planned to kill them all as soon as he got the sword. Laughing at the situation, the master says the fewer people who know about this, the better, and affirms that this should be a good enough souvenir to take to the underworld. Soon after, the masked man is attacked and killed, ironically by the very sword he fought so hard to steal. Kurosaki Takumi also has a system, and receives an alert saying that the sword's durability has dropped by 2, leaving 8 durability points remaining. He then says he'll be in trouble if it breaks before it can be repaired. In a dream, the protagonist hears a voice telling him to remember the gift he received, until he wakes up startled by the dream. Not only that, but he feels pain in his neck, and realizes his hourglass has turned once more. Sattoru surprises him with a hug, happy to see the protagonist awake, because he thought he had died. Haruto tells him not to be so dramatic, but Sattoru says that after he was struck by the enemy, a strong flash of light shot out of the water toward the dragon. Another patient overhears the conversation and asks if they're the hunters who were on the bridge. Sattoru says yes, and that along with him and Haruto, his senior was also there. The protagonist gets tired of it and walks away, leaving the two talking. Then the senior speaks up and says that even though the protagonist doesn't like Satoru's attitude, he still saved him. Sattoru insisted on rescuing him, even threatening the search team from the Daien Guild and causing a commotion until they finally found him unconscious on the beach. The protagonist wonders if a low-ranked hunter really managed to make the Daien Guild and the association take action by threatening them. Soon he realizes that the master of the Daien Guild is named Shinoda Makoto, and considers that the boy might be related to him in some way. But he quickly dismisses that possibility, thinking he's been watching too many dramas. The scene cuts to the president's office at the association. Nanas asks if Hunter Sano Haruto is dead. Moore says yes, and he witnessed it on the spot, but considering they were planning to exploit him, he says Nanas doesn't seem very surprised, or maybe she has other plans. With that, Nanas simply says that all hunters face death at some point. Moore, in turn, doesn't know how to respond. Fuwa says that besides the official documents, it's true they are involved in this matter, so the association will provide full support to recover the Longsword. Arez says that in that case, he should send all his elite hunters, as she already knows the sword's location. Director Fuwa says he had already suspected Arez's behavior, but is surprised she knows where the sword is. Although the sword is not bound to a user, its unique traits leave an imprint that detects the user's level, and because of that, Arez can track it. Nanas didn't have such detailed information and thinks that Arez handed over the sword to the protagonist as if she were doing him a favor. Arez says that about an hour ago, the sword's imprint was detected and it was used. Last time, its durability was at 10, but now it's dropping. And if it continues like this, Nanas knows it will disappear. The only lead to finding it is Arez's mother, who vanished 15 years ago during the Great Catastrophe. Arez then asks how she knows that. Nanas says her position as a team leader in the Hunters Association is not without merit, and she also knows that the Longsword is a memento from Arez Hugh's mother. With that, Arez respectfully asks for the team leader's cooperation once again to help her find her mother's keepsake. Nanas leaves, thinking those two are definitely hiding something more. The story of Haruto's death is also suspicious. Nanas knows he wasn't someone who would die so easily. Then Shinoda Makoto appears and calls out to her. He asks where she's going with such a serious face. She says it's nothing, she's just thinking about what happened on the bridge. But Shinoda Makoto says it's long past time for her to return to the Daeyeon Guild. Nanas says that the more time passes, the more dungeons appear. However, the main guilds that should be responding and overseeing them are instead creating companies and treating dungeons as mere profit generators. Even with today's dungeon pause, if it's confirmed that the Daeyeon Guild neglected its duties, they will be held responsible. That's why Nanas states that she's with the association because there's still much to do here, calling Shinoda her father. With that, her father says he actually had another reason for coming here, but realizes he ended up saying something unnecessary, and tells his daughter to visit the Hunter's Hospital first before leaving. Speaking of the Hunter's Hospital, Haruto is on the rooftop checking his stats. Although he couldn't copy the exact essence of the Longsword, he managed to fully absorb and replicate its abilities. He had been worried about how to use that while hunting after copying it, but now just in time, the Berserk ability has also been activated. It hurt like hell when the sword activated right before he died, but thanks to that, he managed to kill Akusha with a level over 400. After that, the protagonist not only received the bonus for defeating the enemy, but also copied the abilities he wanted. He thinks that now that his copy ability has evolved, it can also absorb and fuse, and when he briefly tests the unique vibration ability, it'll be incredible. Now Haruto is a level 276 hunter, a high-ranking one, and he thinks all he has to do now is find the guy who killed him and retrieve the Longsword. Until he hears a commotion and hides, he hears Nanas telling someone that she warned him earlier to run from danger. The protagonist has never heard her speak like that, and wonders who she's talking to. Sattoru says this wouldn't have happened if she had properly stabilized the dungeon. With that, the protagonist has a realization, and notices that they not only share the same name, but they are siblings and children of the guild master. Suddenly, what the senior said earlier starts to make sense. Before, it all seemed like something straight out of a drama, so he thought it was just speculation. But now he realizes it was actually true. In the middle of the siblings' conversation, Sattoru says that the protagonist is alive, and his sister asks where he is now. Haruto realizes that Nanas is looking for him, and thinks it might be because he failed to stop the sword from being captured. He gets scared and thinks he'll have to retrieve the sword before being discovered, otherwise, he fears what might happen. But in his attempt to flee, he bumps into someone, who just so happens to be the representative of the International Hunters Association. Moore sees the protagonist and says he's the thief who stole the Kalissa dragon sword, so the protagonist's escape attempt is foiled, but his problems are only just beginning. Moore says Haruto tricked them by pretending to be from the association. Haruto tries to argue, saying this is all a misunderstanding. However, Moore says that after losing the sword, the protagonist walks around freely and asks if he still has the nerve to say it was a misunderstanding. Soon, Haruto realizes that Moore has lost his temper, and this is getting dangerous. Until Moore draws a sword and is about to attack him, Arez appears and asks what he plans to do with that. Moore says he has no intention of using abilities inside the hospital, but before dragging this guy away, he just wants to leave the mark that should have been there in the first place. Haruto realizes that if he doesn't act, his situation will only get worse, so he decides to use his unique vibration ability, and breaks Moore's sword before getting hit. By doing so, he impresses not only Moore, but also the two siblings who had approached after hearing all the commotion. Nanas realizes that the protagonist used the dragon's unique vibration and wonders how he obtained that ability. And now that she stops to think about it, she questions if Haruto's vibe has changed. Elsewhere, a pop concert is happening. On stage, a girl group is performing, driving a crowd of fans into a frenzy. But there's something special about their leader. After the show, she heads to her sports car. Her name is Lee Siola, and she's an idol in her country. Her group mates all leave in a single car, and before leaving, they even compliment her performance. While she has her own personal car, one of the girls asks if Sila comes from a rich family. Another says she's been driving an expensive car even before the performances began. They even say they'd like to drive a car like that too. But while speeding on the road, Lee Siola gets cut off by another driver and panics behind the wheel, trying to steer out of danger and avoid an accident. She barely avoids crashing, but takes the chance to curse out the other driver. However, the man gets out of his car, carrying a suitcase. The girl apparently recognizes him, but feels uncomfortable. Either way, the man approaches her car and asks if the recording went well. He also says she must go to the dungeon if she wants to reverse this situation. Back to Nanas, she and the others come across a ruined building and ask if that's really where the sword was last used. Since there's nothing there, Arez says they arrived too late. Then Nanas asks if there's any chance she'll find the sword again. Otherwise, they'll have to wait for the enemy to use the sword again and reveal its location themselves. Then the protagonist notices the connection to the blood tower. The enemy thought he would die and mentioned his affiliation, and spoke the name of a guild Haruto had never heard of. Nana says that if there's a guild the protagonist doesn't know, then it must be a hidden guild that exists only in the shadows. Haruto says they can't just wait around for them to use the sword again, and Moore mentions that the sword's durability is a problem. But Nana states that this clue is enough, because there was someone who knew this kind of information better than anyone. A flashback shows that 15 years ago, a girl was caught in catastrophe and received this ability from a being. At first she thought she had awakened as a hunter. All she had was an unknown ability. This ability is like a computer command to reverse everything, like copy and paste. She learned that it worked not only on people but also on objects. Soon, she began selling expensive broken or abandoned items she found. Although it wasn't a healing or recovery ability, the girl also managed to make money by healing people. However, there were clear limits to how much money she could earn with this ability. She needed money more than anything because her parents were unconscious in the hospital due to an accident during the catastrophe. When she first realized she had this ability, she tried to revert her parents to the way they were before the accident, but found out that this ability requires something called mana, depending on the target she wants to revert. The reason she was able to go back in time before without using mana was because there were only 1 or 2 items and minor injuries being treated. Mana is a type of energy. Only hunters can gather or give mana, so from then on, she followed dungeons, risking her life to obtain mana. She acted as a support in groups with a lot of mana, like a healer. But going through dungeons as a regular person, not an awakened one, was a series of dangers, like walking into a lion's den unarmed. However, the hardest part was the disrespect and mockery from the team members. The girl almost had an even worse experience, and she doesn't want to go back or anything, but it's really starting to affect her now. Until, in the midst of her despair, someone shows up saying they noticed something interesting. A man approached and asked if she was the famous mana beggar. The man she met on that occasion was named Kurosaki Takumi. Back in the present, Jill took her to a restaurant and said Sila was quiet and didn't care about him, then asked what she was doing with all that money. He also asked if anyone could imagine that the idol Lee Sila lives like this and orders huge amounts of food every day, because that would shock the world since idols are obsessed with dieting. But he claimed that Sila could revert it whenever she wanted. He knew it from the very first moment he saw her. Jill said that when people died, she didn't even blink, only cared about removing the expensive equipment from the bodies. He also said that he and she are the same in that regard. Sila felt uncomfortable with that comment. Then Gil said it was a misunderstanding and claimed that as long as their contract is maintained, he doesn't care what she does. Annoyed, Sila asked why she had to go with Jill on this conquest this time. She really just wished he would gather the mana like he normally does and give it to her. Jill showed her the Longsword and said he needed to recover the item, and for that, an enormous amount of mana was necessary, but it's impossible without her. He also said it would be the last time she entered a dungeon. Lee Sila didn't believe him, because he'd said that before and didn't keep his word. In turn, Jill simply asked if she found it. Sila asked if he meant the item that generates infinite mana. He said that if Sila were there personally, the story would be different. He also knew that the agreement was not to enter dungeons unless necessary, but he needed her to be present and to take part in the strategy team. Since it would be the last time and the reward would be worth it, he said Sila would do it willingly. Far from there, at the headquarters of the Future Guild, Haruto was with Nanis and asked if the person calling themselves the source of information was their last resort. She said yes. The protagonist said that if it's about information, Midas or Daegen, ranked first and second in the guild, are the best. Nanis said that at the very least, this person's information about dungeon strategy management is world-class, something she and her association acknowledged, where no one can stop their greed for conquering dungeons. Inside the room, the leader said he had knowledge about the giant golem's heart, also known as the infinite mana generation item. Nanis said it very rarely appears in the Snowy Mountain Golem dungeon, and asked if it's a reward item for the hidden boss of the dungeon. The leader said that because of this item, his guild mobilized the information team and has been gathering data to find the hidden heart of the giant golem dungeon. And besides that, he said they just hit the jackpot, the blood tower that Hunter Haruto talked about. His guild didn't even know that tower existed, but they discovered that the tower secretly recruited a strategy team for the Snowy Mountain of Golems. That's what their guild's information network caught. But those guys are worse than anyone could imagine. Key player assassinations, dungeon group killings, item interceptions. They're a shady guild that does everything while staying hidden. The protagonist thinks the infinite mana generation item is useless for him, but it's such a luxurious item, it's definitely something they would want. But even if they really discovered a hidden dungeon, Haruto starts asking himself several questions like, what does obtaining this item have to do with the Longsword? Or did they steal the Longsword to capture the giant golem? With a Longsword that barely has any durability left, is that item more valuable than the Longsword? Nana says that this time, the hidden heart of the giant golem's dungeon has been discovered, and she asks if they're saying they plan to gather a team and attack the snowy golem mountain. Arez says that's unlikely. The hidden dungeon was discovered only once 15 years ago, and hasn't appeared again since then. Haruto asks how Arez knows that. She says she can't share the details, but she's also very interested in this dungeon and has been researching it. The snowy golem mountain is well known, precisely because it's resource-rich. This is a level 1 dungeon that strategy teams usually avoid. If it weren't for the groups, it would have been closed long ago. Who says that with a dungeon like that, assassins are forming strategy teams? Even if it's not a hidden dungeon, there's definitely something there. Haruto asks when they'll depart. Ku replies that recruitment is already complete, and they might have already left. As expected, the protagonist thinks they planned this strategy before even wielding a Longsword. Nana says they should leave immediately then. But before that, she asks Ku if there's a strategy team in the guild that can be mobilized right away. He's caught off guard but answers yes. Nanes thought that the future guild always had a standby strategy team comparable to the association. That's why she asked. Ku asks why she's saying that. Since the hidden dungeon information isn't that reliable, there's a reason it's usually avoided. The environment is extremely harsh and filthy. The golems are numerous and difficult to destroy. Even so, the protagonist and the others do not fear the danger and head to the location. A battle between hunters and ice golems quickly begins. The enemies are hit, but they have the ability to regenerate. And despite being large and heavy, their strikes are surprisingly fast and quite destructive, giving the hunters a hard time. Ku sees the enemies regenerating like that and asks when they'll get them. He says to hurry up and destroy the core, so they can't regenerate again. After using his skill to gather all the golems, he blows them up mid-air. Then he tells his men to do the same, each in their own way. Now he wants his men to follow him and hunt as many enemies as possible. Haruto remembers that Ku said he didn't want to come, but now he's all fired up. Still, he's impressive. Arez warned him that once inside the dungeon, he'd need to hunt as many golems as possible. Haruto says he usually just hunts as much as needed in a dungeon. She says that's the condition for the mid-boss to appear in the golem's snowy field. According to her research, this is an inductive type dungeon. The protagonist doesn't know what that means and feels unsure. Ku says that's why he mentioned earlier that it's complicated. Dungeons with hidden dungeons are often like this. A normal dungeon is usually divided into zones, so you know the route and can go straight to the final boss zone. But in an inductive dungeon, the conditions for the next zones to appear must be a plus B plus C equals D. If even one of those isn't met, the others won't appear. Arez says she suspects that due to some error 15 years ago, the dungeon's progress got messed up. That's why the hidden dungeon hasn't shown up again until now. Haruto asks if the condition for the mid-boss to appear is to kill as many golems as possible. Arez says they don't know how to reset the dungeon, so they need to be as thorough as possible given the circumstances. Thus, the protagonist fights the golems with everything he's got. Even the hunters notice he's using spider-type abilities, like the ones found in low-level dungeons. Meanwhile, Arez, being a mage, uses magic in combat. She provides range cover for her teammate. Meanwhile, Mord chooses close quarters combat. The other team members face a tougher challenge against the enemies, even running away from them at times, until Nana sees what's happening and jumps in to help. She fights both in melee and with magic, and using her magic, she easily defeats the golem that was troubling the weaker Ons, using the shockwave ability she had acquired earlier. After that, she asks if the men are okay, and they respond yes, but she notices something different about one of them. She quickly realizes it's her brother, who showed up there despite being told not to. Sattoru says he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He wanted to come help his new brother. Nanas gets more than irritated when she hears this, as the protagonist has more favor with her brother than she does. Still at the hospital, Sattoru threw a tantrum like a child, begging the protagonist to let him join the hunt, claiming he didn't want to leave Haruto alone, since he could get lost in the dungeon, but the protagonist said he wouldn't be alone. Sattoru got excited, thinking that meant he was going too. After so much insisting, Haruto agreed to let him participate. Knowing this, Nanas wonders what was going through the protagonist's mind, but Sattoru defends his decision, because he clearly saw back then that it wasn't his sister or Master Ku who split the dragon in half, it was Haruto who did it. Nanas notices how Haruto fights and realizes he's not only using the spider skill, he's also using the shockwave ability, which is only gained after defeating the dragon Quishia, so she concludes her brother is telling the truth. Far away, Takumi says Sila is doing well and that they need to clear the dungeon. Takumi looks out at the horizon and sees the battle happening. He also assembled a support team. He says his people were blending in with the opponents and hiding in stealth while stealing mana and items, but no matter how good they are, they'll still be caught by high-level individuals like the future guild leader. These high-level types fear nothing, so they don't bother upgrading their detection skills. On the other hand, he knows his team often faces situations where low levels must fight high levels, so they maximize their own skills, along with stealth and hidden weapons, so they're rarely caught. Easy and efficient work, that's the motto of his Blood Tower Guild. Then he asks Sila how the mana transfer process is going. She says this mana transmitter is a very expensive item, and to fill just one, you need to kill at least 100 trash mobs. Sila remembers it took 10 to revert the Ancient Bridge dungeon last time. What she's curious about is how much mana it will take to revert that Longsword. Takumi says that for this sword, it'll probably take twice the amount. So Sila asks if they'll need to defeat the dungeon boss to revert the sword. In response, Takumi says there's a powerful barrier in this hidden dungeon, and the only sword that can cut it is the Longsword of the Kalija dragon. Sila asks how he has all this information. Takumi says she's questioning him too much and tells her to just focus on doing her job. She says she's just nervous since it's been a while since she entered a dungeon, but also says this strategy is very sneaky and petty. She also tells him not to care too much about what she says. As long as the contract remains in effect, Sila doesn't care what he does. What Sila really cares about is getting the promised item, because with it, she'll be able to help her family return to normal. Back to the protagonist, he's fighting increasingly stronger monsters, until he notices there's a core inside them. He realizes this one is different from the others, and before breaking it, plans to make a copy. Not only that, but he sees there are cores within the ground as well. Then Ku approaches and simply says it's finally going to begin, because now that the area is cleared, they can proceed to the next stage. A stage that's harder than the protagonist imagines. A much larger and stronger golem appears, and he's not in the mood to talk at all. From a distance, it hurls stones at the hunters, and among them is the protagonist, who immediately realizes the situation just got worse. Ku orders everyone to fall back. Meanwhile, he uses the chance to attack. His men notice that the boss took down the enemy with a single blow, and say they were scared for nothing. But right after that, they're surprised. Even Ku didn't expect it. The enemy regenerates faster than the others, so he attacks the golem again, but he can't hit the core that keeps the monster alive. He realizes that unless the core is destroyed, the monster will keep coming back no matter how much they attack. The protagonist also notices this, and uses the spider web to grab the core before it becomes the stone monster again. But his attempt isn't very effective, because the golem returns anyway. Haruto saw with his own eyes that the web couldn't hold the core and thinks he'll need to use another strategy, and fast. Until suddenly, Nana shouts for the protagonist to get out of the way. She then uses one of her abilities to attack the golem. After hitting the enemy with fire, Nana says they now need to attack the enemy simultaneously. Who knows that, and for that very reason, he's thinking of another method, because if they're not careful, they'll have to melt all the remaining debris there. The protagonist is aware of the situation. Previously, Arez said that the most troublesome subjugation this time is the Shift Golem mid-boss. This is also the terrifying part of the inductive dungeon. Inductive dungeons reveal the next zone once the conditions are met. The next zone changes based on the previous one, and the core of the shifting golem appears. Ku says that in other words, they have to fight the remnants of the golem they struggle to defeat. Normally, the result would be mental exhaustion or total annihilation. If this were a normal dungeon, it's said that this enemy would be equivalent to a final boss, so there are two ways to defeat it. Nana says they must destroy the golem's core, or melt the stones surrounding it. That's exactly what she's trying to do, but the enemy is not that easy to defeat. As soon as she turns her back, Nanas is nearly struck by the golem, but manages to counterattack just in time. The protagonist thinks that if he uses the skill he obtained from the Longsword, Arez will notice immediately, and at this rate, breaking the core will be impossible. But speaking of item reward abilities, he remembers that he obtained the Claw of the King Bear. He quickly thinks this might finally be useful, so he copies the abilities of the Claw's former wielder and charges into attack, hoping it works. Meanwhile, Nanas holds back the stone golem. Moore, seeing this, can't believe the enemy is still standing. Arez, on the other hand, praises Nanas' skills, since her Hellfire attack consumes a lot of mana. The golem tries to regenerate once again, but Nanas attacks it again to prevent that from happening. However, her attack loses effectiveness each time she uses it, since her mana is running out, until Haruto appears to intervene and wraps the entire golem in spider webs. Nanas is glad to see him helping, unlike Ku, who's left speechless watching the protagonist do that. But Haruto himself snaps him out of it, telling him not to just stand there and to attack the enemy. He tells Ku he has a plan to stop the core from acting, but they don't have much time to strike, so they must do it now. Ku doesn't like taking orders, but agrees to go with the plan. After all, failure isn't an option, so he takes advantage of the enemy's vulnerability and lands a solid hit. Soon, once again, the golem's core is sent flying. Quickly, the protagonist seizes the opportunity and wraps only the core in webs, preventing it from using the stones to regenerate the golem. Upon realizing it worked, Haruto celebrates and thinks he should have stopped the core and the remains from touching earlier. Seeing that it worked, Ku is left speechless and doesn't understand how that happened. Nanes thinks that even though Haruto's level has increased, he would need immense strength to pull that off. But thinking back on it, even in the Great Spider Boss room, and during the battle against Queshia, in every critical moment, Haruto was always there. Arez says that using the King Bear's abilities is such a protagonist thing to do. Even the other team members are surprised by it. From a distance, the leader of the Shadow Guild sees what was done to the core, and is shocked that the stone golem was stopped. Sila is also surprised and asks how that's possible. Takumi simply tells her to stop what she's doing, because they'll need to speed up the plan and launch the operation. Everyone must take their positions. With that, his team starts moving. Sila asks what exactly is happening, because she realizes it's a situation serious enough that Kurosaki Takumi is revealing himself personally. Takumi says it's thanks to that strange guy, and it seems now getting the core key is going to be a bit more troublesome. Sila understands the seriousness of the situation and prepares for what's to come. Until suddenly, Sattoru watches from the shadows. He wonders what exactly he's supposed to find here, since he sees the enemy leader pulling away and that girl gathering mana. He starts wondering if he should report this. Previously, he had received a stealth item from the protagonist. Sattoru asked Haruto if it was really okay to give him such an expensive item. The protagonist said that this item would be important for the mission. He also said that Sattoru didn't need to participate in the battle against the monsters. He should use that item to find the lost dungeon and report back as soon as possible. With that, Sattoru went there to carry out the task under the protagonist's orders, while his sister and the others were left with the heavier work. Back to the protagonist, he asks if he needs to destroy the core. Ku and Nanes say yes. After all, he was the one who captured it, so he should be the one to destroy it. Haruto thinks this is the first time he's been treated so well and feels strange. Either way, he already copied the core, and now it's time to destroy it. After that, he obtains the dungeon key. Moore says he never thought he'd see it in person, and asks how Arez feels now that she's one step closer to her mother. Arez says it's just the key, and the real challenge begins now. Haruto pauses for a moment to check his status and wonders if with the level boost from the Longsword, that makes it level 285, because he's almost a high-level hunter above level 300 and thinks the day of his solo debut is near. But their joy is short-lived, as a massive explosion goes off in the middle of the team, throwing many of them far away, leaving several injured on the ground. Takumi approaches and says that was expensive, but claims the power is incredible, and that money really makes the world go round, and if you abandon your conscience a little, it becomes easier and more efficient. But right after, he's caught off guard. The protagonist appears and tries to trap him using his web skill. He sees the enemy is holding the Longsword, and demands he return it. However, the enemy doesn't even consider the possibility. Seeing Haruto under attack, Nanes gets worried, and uses her skill called Hell Bastard to help him. Arez also gets concerned, but Moore tells her not to get involved, or she might get caught in the crossfire. Nanes' strike is devastating, and hits a wide area in its path, but it takes a big toll on her mana, causing blood to drip from her nose as soon as she uses it. Who panics, saying she needs healing immediately. Arez approaches and warns Nanes not to use any more mana, since the gas that prevents mana absorption may have been released along with the pillar explosion. It's a nasty tactic they use to immobilize high-level hunters. Nanes asks why they use something so dangerous. The enemy, after restraining the protagonist, approaches and says his tactics are effective. Ku can't believe what he's seeing, as he realizes the enemy is using dark abilities. Those techniques are supposed to be forbidden, because their use is far too dangerous, so he doesn't know how this opponent is using them. At this point, Kurosaki Takumi only wants one thing. He sees the key that was with the protagonist, and takes it for himself. With that, he says the mission is complete, but there's still unfinished business, because he claims he can't let the protagonist live. Haruto says the same can be said for him, surprising Takumi by still being conscious. Seeing the enemy in that state, Haruto says it's a good thing the guy who stole the Longsword is a scumbag just like this opponent, so he doesn't have to hold back. The protagonist then uses his spider abilities combined with the bears. This way, he not only restrains the enemy, but also traps him in webs mixed with claws. Some members of Takumi's team notice it's the same technique used to trap the golem's core. Haruto, in turn, says touching the Longsword was a mistake, but right after, he's surprised. As his webs start breaking apart, the enemy, who seemed to have escaped, appears behind him, saying it's the first time he's seen a technique like that, and if there hadn't been a shadow nearby, he would have died for nothing. But he says it's a poor skill, and asks why all those high-level hunters they killed so far died with such regret on their faces. The protagonist asks if the enemy knows what he's called. Haruto says they call him the mana support because he shares mana with his allies. This was the first time he tried it from this far, but it worked. Takumi doesn't understand what the protagonist is talking about, but claims this will be his end, until Ku appears saying he doesn't know what's going on, but he's overflowing with mana, and he's going to wipe out the Blood Tower Guild right there. Seeing the attack Ku launched, the Dark Guild's boss thinks this is the counter skill to his Shadow Shift, and he can't escape from it. Then he orders Sila to reverse it. Even from afar, she receives the order, and uses the mana she had stored to channel her next move. She then uses her powers to restore and rebuild the dungeon and the golems to their original state. Upon seeing all this happen, Nanis and the others are very surprised. Ku realizes that the dungeon is being restored, and all the previously defeated enemies as well. Right after that, he is attacked by one of the stone golems, but he defends himself with a magic shield and thinks that doing so must require a lot of mana. He considers that he needs to protect everyone with his magic barrier, but doing so would leave him unable to fight the enemies. Still, he can't just stand there, and he needs to think of a solution. Meanwhile, Nanis has already gone on the offensive. Ku wasn't expecting to see her in action so soon, but Nanis reminds him that the protagonist is a mana bank that allows him to generate infinite mana for his allies, which is why she's back on her feet. Ku is in disbelief, thinking that only mage-type hunters can do something like that, and yet Haruto isn't even a mage-type hunter. For ultra-high-level hunters like him and Nanis, activating their abilities requires an enormous amount of mana. Even so, Haruto is sharing mana not only with them, but with everyone around, and in such a short time. He even considers the possibility of recruiting the protagonist for his guild, after witnessing so much potential. However, setting that aside for now, Ku knows he must deal with the giant golem as soon as possible. On one hand, Nanis says that the collapse of the dungeon at the Rainbow Bridge was without a doubt caused by the Blood Tower Guild. But now Moore says the bigger problem is that the dungeon has been reset, and they might be able to reset it again. However, Arez says the reason the hidden dungeon hasn't been discovered until now is probably because the dungeon's logic became tangled somehow. Whether they knew that or not, she's not sure, but now the chances of the hidden dungeon appearing are 100%. Still, something seems off to Nanis. She says there are definitely fewer respawn golems than there were initially. Ku says that apparently what was melted couldn't be restored, but either way, they need to finish this quickly and go after those guys from the Blood Tower. Nanis hopes Ku is right, but thinks that if the enemies use the same method they use at the bridge, they won't be able to stop them. The protagonist hasn't returned yet, and that worries Ku, who fears the worst might have happened. Speaking of Haruto, he is protected inside his webs. Meanwhile, he takes the chance to catch his breath, since facing the enemy wasn't that easy. Takumi doesn't give him much time to rest, as he attacks Haruto once again, but Haruto counters. His opponent asks how a low-level hunter can fight like that. Haruto simply tells the enemy that a low-level hunter is the one who's going to ruin all his plans. Then he uses his webs to trap the enemy's right hand. However, Takumi still has his other hand, and says he'll make sure the protagonist never uses those webs again. He then uses fire to attack, and escapes the bindings using the sword's abilities. The protagonist uses his own webs to shield himself from the flames and realizes that the sword's power is truly impressive. But thanks to that, he thinks its true power has now been unlocked. He wonders how the enemy knows so much about the sword, and quickly concludes that once he captures him, he'll be able to ask everything he needs. But the enemy has vanished from his sight, and Haruto has no idea where his target is. Meanwhile, at the Japanese headquarters of the Hunter Association, Fuwa tells Hinode not to worry, since Ku is on the front lines and he trusts he'll take care of everything. However, Shinoda says that the fact the Blood Tower Guild is involved is already a big issue, and they have very little intel on the enemy. Takeuchi-gu says that if the enemies attack, high-level hunters could be killed, and there'd be no way to gather information on them. But he claims that his guild might have discovered the reason they acted so boldly is due to the presence of the global multinational hunter guild, Starfield. Fuwa is caught off guard by this information. Shinoda is too. He asks why such a massive global guild would be involved with a small and obscure guild in Japan. Gu says that this dungeon, although it doesn't look like it now, was one of the dungeons that collapsed during the Great Disaster 15 years ago, and everyone remembers it. The golem army that appeared back then was more terrifying than demons from hell. One of the highest-ranking mages in the world, Nishihara Haruka herself from Japan, was the one who sealed the Snowy Mountain dungeon of the golems back then. Shinoda agrees, saying that if it weren't for Nishihara's sacrifice at that time, they would have been doomed. Gu says the heart of the giant golem, sealed in the dungeon, still draws a lot of attention. Both sides are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve their goals. It wouldn't be surprising if they joined forces to conquer the mountain dungeon. Moreover, he asks if Arez Hugh is Nishihara Haruka's daughter. Shinoda confirms and asks if besides retrieving the sword, who also wants to investigate Nishihara's death. He answers no because the hunter Nishihara hasn't been officially declared dead. This surprises Shinoda, since he thought that all the hunters who disappeared in that dungeon were declared dead without their bodies being found. Gyu reveals that there was a survivor who returned from that dungeon 5 years ago and claimed to have seen the hunter Nishihara. Fuwa then asks if he's saying that after 15 years, Nishihara is still alive. Gyu says that although some information was hidden by Starfield, only part of it is known, but it's a fact and the dungeon still stirs curiosity. Suddenly, an employee enters the room saying there's something urgent. Fuwa asks what could be so important that he would interrupt the meeting. The employee turns on the TV. It reports that a dungeon has just collapsed. The dungeon didn't just collapse, it destroyed the city center, and chaos has taken over the place. Gyu realizes that the enemies attacking the city center are ice golems, and that can't be a coincidence. He immediately wonders what's behind this. Back to Kurosaki Takumi. He's leading his team to another location. Sila asks if there's a problem with the plan. Since she's never seen Takumi this troubled, Takumi only tells her to worry about herself. After walking a bit, they finally reach the entrance to the Snowy Mountain Golem's cave. Sila gets excited, believing they'll finally get the heart of the giant golem. Sattoru, still in his invisible form, continues tailing the enemies. Before crossing the bridge, he realizes something. This dungeon is truly massive. One of the henchmen tries to enter the dungeon, until he senses something strange, and calls his master's attention. Takumi thinks that since Starfield is a global guild, their information is as accurate as expected. What he's seeing is the very thing sealed 15 years ago by the great mage and strongest hunter, Nishihara Haruka, the heart of the giant golem in the hidden dungeon. He then tells Sila to get ready to break the barrier, and to stay alert at all times. Takumi was instructing Sila to restore the Longsword to its original state, but he notices an intruder watching him, which frightens the girl. But Takumi says only a fool would be bold enough to sneak around Blood Tower Guild's territory while hiding. Sattoru soon realizes he's in trouble. The Dark Guild leader doesn't waste any time and attacks. The scene cuts to a type of mini-monster. It's walking across the battlefield, collecting artifacts scattered on the ground, until it picks up an item and runs toward its master. The protagonist tells the little one to eat the magic stone, because he believes he already copied it anyway. He thinks he didn't imagine that the golem core he copied earlier had so many abilities. Haruto is disappointed that he managed to copy it but couldn't absorb the ability. Still, he knows this is a final tier item. He knows a core makes a golem, and if he copies that, he can quickly create an army of golems. That means Haruto can go into dungeons alone without joining a guild. However, if this golem is already huge at level 1, could it be even bigger at level 10? Although it could be problematic if it gets too large, he still wants to take the risk. But then the little golem runs off and startles him. It had noticed Sattoru approaching and sensed he might be a threat, so tried to attack him before he got too close to the protagonist. However, Sattoru was already super frightened. He runs and hugs the protagonist, saying he almost died. After understanding the situation, Haruto apologizes, saying he didn't expect Sattoru to be discovered so easily and let his guard down because it was a high-level stealth skill. But Sattoru says he was at a safe distance and thinks it was the hunters from the future guilds who were spotted. Haruto thinks Ku didn't seem to be thinking about anything, but it turns out he was thinking the same thing. Either way, it's clear the enemies are a whole gang. That should not be underestimated, by the way. Sattoru mentions that there was a girl there. She was even absorbing mana and storing it, to later use it to reset the dungeon. He thought about stopping her, but to be honest, he was afraid, and he apologizes. The protagonist reassures him, saying the boy did a great job. By the way, Sattoru says that girl gave him the feeling that they had seen each other somewhere before. He's also bothered by the little one following the protagonist. Haruto says that's his minion. With that, Sattoru is impressed that the protagonist can even control familiars. Upon reaching the bridge, the boy says the dungeon is at the end of it, but there are people watching from the shadows, so they must move carefully. Haruto tells the boy to go back and bring the other companions. Sattoru then becomes worried, realizing the protagonist wants to go in alone, but Haruto reassures him, saying he will leave his golem to monitor everything. Even though he doesn't want to, Sattoru agrees to obey. Before leaving, Haruto hands the golem's core to the boy, and says that for now, the minion is his. He also explains that it can be used to mislead enemies and is strong in battle, which makes it very useful. Sattoru once again asks if he really deserves something so valuable. Little does he know, the protagonist always has everything in double. In any case, Sattoru goes to meet the others and says he'll return as quickly as possible. The protagonist can only think about how innocent that boy is, but now he needs to focus on what's important and decides to create another minion. He realizes that he truly can create something just as he imagines. It only requires mana, so he creates a bird golem, which is completely connected to its creator. That way, Haruto is able to see through the bird's eyes and gets a privileged view of everything. In doing so, he spots the girl Sattoru was talking about and wonders what she's doing with a longsword in her hands. Meanwhile, Sila follows the guild master's instructions and focuses her power into the sword. until she manages to restore the weapon to its original state. But soon after, she collapses from exhaustion. Such a task demanded a lot from her. Takumi approaches the sword, and upon picking it up, finally has what he wanted. The protagonist watches all of this in disbelief. He realizes it was all only possible thanks to the girl, and notices she has the same abilities he does. Haruto wonders if his skill can also copy and paste the abilities of other people, and thinks he needs to find out if that's possible. But if not, he'll have to make that girl his ally. Elsewhere, Takumi holds the sword, and thinks that the time has finally come to break the barrier to the hidden dungeon. He then approaches the barrier. The force it emits is so great that it can be felt by everyone. Sila is amazed to see how the barrier reacted. Takumi says the original owner of the Longsword was Frederick Hugh, the husband of the hunter Hishihara. He disappeared 15 years ago in this hidden dungeon. The hunter Nishihara placed a barrier that can only be broken by her husband's Longsword, making it impossible for anyone else to enter. If not for the intel from Starfield, they would have had to fight to break the barrier using only this key. This barrier was put in place 15 years ago by the Great Mage. He was the greatest hunter and sword saint in the world, Frederick Hugh, and his wife is the Great Mage Nishihara Haruka, their daughter being Arez. Not wanting to waste any more time, Takumi is eager to open the dungeon, so he uses the sword for that. Right after placing the sword in the lock, the entire place starts to move, revealing the entrance to the secret dungeon. Takumi realizes the rift had been hidden under a hologram, and now, after 15 years, it's finally open. Now he wants to enter and find the heart of the giant golem. The protagonist watches everything and wonders whether he should follow them or wait for reinforcements to arrive. Far from there, in southern Italy, inside an S-rank dungeon, a fallen man says that if he's the target, then he just asks his opponent to kill him, and everyone else too. But the opponent says that if he did that, it would just be murder. However, if they all die, it will only be considered a dungeon accident. After that, the hunter system alerts that due to the death of the last user, the ability will now be transferred to another available user. With that, the hunter receives the skill of the man he just killed, and a mark appears on his neck, causing him pain. But he sees that the method worked, because when he checks his system, the features are available there. Then he performs a new move, which creates a massive hole in the dungeon, until an elf appears and says that apparently the skill was successfully transferred. Instead of deleting them one by one, the range definitely expanded. The hunter says that to make the cursed skill his own, he has to kill the target every time. The worst part is that even after claiming the skill, it doesn't evolve. She is called Midsell and mentions that she's been saying this for a while. The gifts won't be transferred unless the target is killed. The only way to obtain the skill and evolve it without killing the target is to copy it while the target is still alive. The hunter says he's been searching for a way to do that for 10 years and wonders if something like that really exists. Midsell says it's a bit different, but such a skill also existed in her dimension and must be somewhere in this world, looking for a new wielder. With that, the hunter asks about the mission status. She says that based on the information she has, they just received a report. The Blood Tower Guild broke through the Western Hunter's barrier. What they're after is important, and the elf wants the hunter to bring back the heart of the giant golem before they do. Back in the dungeon, the protagonist's group has just reached the entrance. Ku says he rushed over, and those guys are nowhere to be seen. There are also no signs of battle. He then asks if the enemies went the wrong way. The protagonist says it hasn't been long since they entered. There are no monsters either, and since the path is straight, they figure they'll catch up to the enemies in time. Then Nanas calls attention to the Starfields and asks why the world's top-ranked multinational guild would be involved with that Blood Tower Guild. Arez says it's probably because of her mother. The protagonist quickly realizes that the Blood Tower Guild had the information first and wonders if all of this was part of their plan. Haruto also thinks this makes everything even more difficult, because he's just realized that the key to the raid might not be the giant golem's heart, but Arez herself. Ku says they need to hurry and stop wasting time. He sees that if Starfield is supporting the enemies, it makes sense they'd be using shadow movement abilities. He immediately wants to capture one of them for interrogation. Sattoru is also with them, along with his little golem. Seeing this, Ku asks how he got such a companion. Sattoru says it's a gift from his friend Haruto. This surprises Ku because even though it's small, the protagonist managed to subordinate a snow golem. Nanas then asks how Sattoru got such a valuable gift. Her brother simply replies that the protagonist is a friend of his. Then suddenly, Sattoru falls into a trap. He stepped on the wrong spot, but he wasn't alone. Ku and the little golem were close by. Next, they disappear inside the magic circle, leaving the protagonist extremely worried. However, Haruto and the others are also caught. They are teleported by the portal to another location, but at first glance, they don't see Sattoru and Ku. Thus, Haruto thinks he should have stayed closer to the boy. However, his problems are only beginning, because a T-Rex appears right in front of him. Haruto wonders where this monster came from, but before being attacked, Nanas appears to help him, and with just one strike, she cuts off the dinosaur's head. The protagonist says there shouldn't be a dinosaur inside a snowy dungeon and asks how that's possible. Arez replies that they're no longer in the previous dungeon and apparently, they're in another dimension. It's likely they were teleported to a dimensional dungeon. Nana says that it's been 15 years since dungeons like these last appeared. Arez says she knows that because it was her mother who sealed them, but for some reason the seal was broken, and multidimensional dungeons are connected by magic circles that transport people to various dimensions. Once these magic circles are activated, they open a portal to another world, where not only humans, but also creatures can end up crossing over. Arez says that apparently her mother suspected a multidimensional dungeon might have gotten out of control, causing the great disaster. Nana says that's why the hunter Nishihara set up a barrier here, so they must clear this place quickly. But right after that, she and the others are shocked, because several creatures suddenly appear to face them. Moore speaks up, saying this won't be an easy task to accomplish. Far from there, in the city center, several monsters are causing massive chaos, destroying places and attacking people. The guild has sent hunters to try to fight them off. A team leader realizes they have to destroy the golem's cores so they won't regenerate. However, they're struggling to defeat the enemies. Apparently, the golems are loaded with mana and are giving the hunter teams a hard time. In a moment of carelessness, one golem gets close to taking one of them down, but another hunter appears to help, and with a single slash cuts the golem in half. A team member tries to thank him but doesn't know the name of the one who just arrived. He realizes the man is a foreigner. The man says he was only there on a business trip, but upon seeing all the chaos, he couldn't just stand around doing nothing. The hunter thanks him for the help and says the foreigner speaks their language very well. By the way, the foreigner heard them mention something earlier and asks, "What is a mana source?" One of the hunters explains that there's a guy who's not very good at fighting but plays an excellent role as support, generating infinite mana for the teams. The foreigner is surprised to hear that, but the hunter says he hasn't seen that guy in a long time and doesn't know where he is. He just remembered him for a brief moment. That makes the foreigner think he's never heard of such an ability before, and he becomes intrigued. Right after, he's taken aback, because from the top of a building appear Takuchi Gu, Guild Master of Midas, and Shinoda Makoto, Guild Master of the Great Sages, and he thinks this will be interesting to watch. Makoto sees the golems in the city and realizes they likely came from the Snow Mountain dungeon, saying this is a good opportunity for Takuchi to act. Yu asks what's wrong with the dungeons. He also says the reward for this incident will come out of the association's equipment vault. He heads into battle and activates his stone armor. With this armor, he can go toe-to-toe with the enemies, and he's ready to face the golems. But he says that even though he's covered in stone, he's not the same as a golem. While Gu fights in close combat on the ground, Makoto uses long-range magic to battle, and wherever his beam strikes, everything is obliterated. Gu sees this and says the old man must be having fun, until right in front of him, an even larger golem appears. But Gu doesn't flinch in the face of the enemy, because when it comes to raw strength battles, he doesn't feel like he'll lose. He reinforces his armor even more, and both of them throw punches, clashing with force. But the golem comes out worse from it, as the impact of the punch leaves it in ruins. With its defeat, its core becomes exposed. Gu grabs it, saying he's not letting the old man take this win, and then crushes the core with his hand. After that, the dungeon's final boss is defeated, and the situation calms down. The guild members celebrate their victory. From a distance, the foreigner watches everything. He sees that Takuchi Gu is Japan's #1 hunter, and as leader of his own guild, he proved his fame by ending the chaos in just 10 minutes. But he can't copy other people's skills, and unexpectedly, the foreigner says he's obtained valuable information. Speaking of which, he wonders if the girl he's looking for is still in the dungeon, and starts imagining what she's doing now. Sila ended up getting hit, but 20 minutes before that happened, a horde of zombies surrounded the team she was part of. Takumi says he has no information about what's to come, so everything now depends on luck. But now that he has the sword at full power, he thinks it'll be much easier. He then attacks the horde of enemies, and with a single strike, destroys them all. Now that the path is clear, they can move forward. One team member says they finally reached the entrance to the final boss's room, and the leader says they have the key to enter. Soon he places the key into the lock and opens the door to the boss room. Inside, what they find is astonishing. Several giant statues are spread throughout the area. One of them comments that they might have arrived too early and wonders if the boss will reappear. But Sila doesn't understand their dismissiveness, because from the moment she stepped into the room, she felt an immense pressure all over her body. She wonders if she's the only one feeling it, and considers that maybe the others are used to it, since unlike her, they're hunters. In any case, a team member says they should take advantage of the lack of enemies to grab whatever they want. But before he could do that, one of the statues attacks him and crushes him with just one strike. These statues are the guardians of the place. Seeing this, the others panic, because they've awakened and are now ready to attack, including Sila, who is horrified by what she sees, since the state of the bodies is nothing pleasant. Takumi wonders why she's so surprised. She used to see this kind of thing all the time. Then he tells the girl not to just stand there and to bring the injured man back while he's still breathing. So Sila pulls herself together and runs to the injured man. She uses one of the mana storage boxes to heal him, but she realizes the box is empty. She wonders if the mana is leaking, since not even a high-ranking mage could break the seal of those mana transfer machines. All the mana is flowing in the same direction, and she wonders where it's going. Meanwhile, the statues are fighting at full power. Takumi tells his team not to panic and to keep fighting. He takes the opportunity to use the sword against them, and tells the others to use the mines meant for high-level monsters. One of them says he's been trying that from the start, but neither the stealth skill nor the mines are activating. In his moment of carelessness, he's struck by one of the statues. Even Takumi, who's used to seeing things like this, is shaken, because the statues are crushing his men like they're made of paper. He doesn't know what to do, since everyone on his team has been killed. He soon panics, thinking he's going to lose. Now he's alone in front of massive rock creatures, so he counts on the power of the sword to turn the situation around. But his system warns that he doesn't have enough mana to use the sword's power again. Takumi is now left at the mercy of danger. He is then attacked as he was very close to the statues. On the other side, Sila moves away from the danger. She followed the mana trail until she reached the source that had absorbed everything stored. Not knowing what it was, Sila still took the risk of trying to interact with this power source, and ended up discovering it was none other than the heart of the giant golem. Even so, she doesn't understand why it absorbed all the surrounding mana, but she believes it could be dangerous. The box that contains the heart doesn't like being touched, and activates its defense mechanism, forcing the girl to run, but that didn't stop her from getting hit. The box of defense struck her right on the side of her abdomen, which caused her great pain. One of the nearby statues approaches her, and takes advantage of her vulnerability, to attack the girl who was already lying on the ground. But through a shadow near her, Takumi reappears and saves her just in time. However, he ends up taking the hit in her place, and for that he uses a healing potion. But he doesn't use it on himself, he uses it on Sila. After that, he picks her up and runs, until his system alerts him that the golem's heart has awakened, and this has triggered the final boss battle. Takumi tries to run toward the door, but realizes it's closing, so he decides to use the shadows again to move and escape. But his system alerts once again that he's out of mana. In a desperate attempt to flee, Takumi runs with all his strength toward the door, until he realizes he won't make it in time, and both of them won't be able to get out. His decision is to sacrifice himself to save Sila. He uses his last strength to throw her out, just before the door closes completely. Sila doesn't understand why Takumi did that, since it's not like him. Takumi simply says that as long as she's alive, she can restore everything to the way it was, and so he stays behind in a dungeon full of dangerous enemies. For her part, Sila calls him crazy and says she's not a hunter, plus she can't absorb mana, so there's no way to restore anything. Sila, nearly losing consciousness, thinks she should never have come here, because if she dies, her parents will be left without her help. Then she starts to feel something strange, as if her body is receiving mana, so she slowly opens her eyes and wonders who is this person in front of her. As she sees the protagonist, the girl says he's the same one who was once providing mana to the hunter Nanes. But she can't think straight because her whole body hurts, and she's still receiving mana little by little, until Haruto says that if she had enough mana, she could heal herself. This catches Sila off guard, as she wonders how this stranger knows about her abilities. Sometime later, Ku is frustrated because they walked all the way there only to find a closed door. Arez says that as long as there's a battle happening inside, the door will remain shut, and they could only open it if they had the key, which they don't. Ku then comments that they should have come here after defeating the revived golem. He looks at the girl and asks who she is. Arez replies that she's a healing support from the Blood Tower Guild, and that she was wounded nearly to death but was healed by Haruto. Ku says they need to investigate her, but for now he wants to keep her contained and under watch. He also says they might end up trapped there if they don't clear the dungeon, something Arez agrees with. Ku then concludes that this is why so many people have disappeared inside this dungeon. Hearing all of this makes the protagonist think about what he should do, since he made a copy of the key that opens the door, but he's hesitant to reveal his secret. Haruto even considers lying and saying he found the key lost somewhere. But before he can make that mistake, Arez feels some kind of connection with the door and touches the lock. With that, the door magically reacts and opens to let her through. Nanas approaches and asks how she did that. Arez says her mother sealed this door, so there must be some connection. Haruto sees this and thinks he was right about Arez being the true key to the dungeon, and with her, he'll be able to explore dimensional dungeons more easily. Standing before the door, Sattoru asks why such a dense aura is coming from the room. Nanas tells everyone to prepare themselves, as there's something inside that's absorbing the mana from everyone present. Haruto asks if this has anything to do with what Sila was talking about earlier. She replies that yes, it does. So he's now aware that the giant golem's heart absorbs the surrounding mana to regenerate itself, and he wonders what will happen when it's fully charged with mana. Sila tells the protagonist to get out of there as soon as possible, because no matter how strong he is, without mana, he can't face the enemies inside. Enemies that Sattoru has already had the displeasure of meeting. His sister gets worried, so she asks the protagonist for help. Haruto then gets ready to act as mana support, and says he'll show everything he can do as a support. So he not only supplies mana to Nanes, but to everyone present. Sila is left speechless because she sees that the dungeon is overflowing with mana, and she thinks that even though it's being absorbed rapidly, it doesn't seem like it will run out anytime soon. She realizes the protagonist is the one responsible for all of it, and wonders if he could be the key to giving her parents the amount of mana they need to heal. Meanwhile, Nanas says they have enough mana now, and should take advantage of the moment to defeat those statues. Ku agrees with what she said, also using the mana he received to attack the enemies and destroy some of the stone statues, but they keep appearing and advancing toward them. Ku sees this new wave approaching and says it's perfect, now he won't have to hold back. Sila gets a little scared by all of it, until she sees someone thrown off to the side and realizes it's Takumi. Though injured, he's still breathing, so she considers going to him to try and heal him, but the protagonist gets there first and faces the man who stole his sword. Haruto doesn't waste time and grabs what he came for. He analyzes the sword with his system and sees that it's been completely restored. Looking at Sila, he concludes that the girl is definitely a curse bearer like him and wants to copy her abilities as soon as he gets the chance. But for now, he has another target. The protagonist touches Takumi and tries to copy his abilities, but since the target is far stronger than him, it becomes impossible. However, his system offers an alternative. It alerts him that as long as the target considers him an enemy, all he has to do is kill the target to obtain his skills. Haruto notices that the target's HP is very low, so he might be able to absorb his ability without killing him. Forced absorption, depending on the circumstances, could be very useful in the future. Until Ku approaches, he knows the girl has healing abilities and tells her to heal Takumi, but only enough so that he doesn't die. He removes her handcuffs and says he has a few questions for that guy, so he can't let him die just yet. Then she looks at the protagonist with some suspicion, but still she does what was asked. Her healing ability is so powerful that even Takumi's severed arm is regenerated. The protagonist sees all of this and thinks that such a skill rivals his own abilities. Right after, Takumi regains consciousness. Sila asks why he's laughing. He simply replies that in the end, both of them managed to survive. After being healed, Takumi is handcuffed. Nanas tells him not to try anything stupid and says that the decision to keep him alive wasn't hers, so they didn't go easy on him. Takumi says that just being alive already makes him happy and affirms that this dungeon has only just begun. After that, a blinding ray of light is emitted from the back of the room. Terrified, Takumi runs away, but before they can stop him from escaping, Nanas has to focus on avoiding being hit by the beam of light. Her brother, worried about her, tries to help, but the danger is much greater than he realizes, and the protagonist knows it and tries to warn him not to get any closer. But Sattoru's recklessness keeps him from listening, which makes the little golem try to intervene. 30 minutes earlier, a group of skeletons was attacking, and Ku stopped them with his powers. Meanwhile, magical stones were falling from the enemies. Ku said the boy could keep them all, but that those stones weren't worth much. However, it was Sattoru's golem that kept the stones, devouring them, and in doing so, it leveled up. Sattoru was happy to see his minion evolve, but when he touched it, something surprising happened. Apparently, the small golem had learned a new ability. Back to the present moment of the story, Nanas, who had run to her brother, noticed as she got closer that Sattoru had been protected by the golem. Even the protagonist is surprised, realizing the little one had learned a skill that allows it to temporarily fuse with its master. From afar, Ku thinks that ability looks a lot like Taikuchi-gu's skill, and wonders if it's related to the core of the golem they previously defeated. But he has no time to worry about that now, as he becomes the new target of the box that protects the heart. Arez warns him to be careful, as that attack is made of pure mana, and is so dense that it can pierce magical barriers. Nanas, in turn, reveals that this attack can be blocked physically. She also becomes a target, but just as she said, she manages to block the box's attack with her sword. The protagonist realizes this makes sense, since the attack is so dense, physical defenses become more effective than magical ones. However, he notices he can't move and defend at the same time. Due to his infinite mana generation ability, The box that holds the heart keeps getting stronger. He then concludes he must find a way to stop it, otherwise he and the others will die. Haruto remembers that the guy from the Blood Tower Guild could move through shadows even inside the threads of the giant spider queens, so he thinks about using that to his advantage. He covers himself with spider webs and uses them to vanish in plain sight. This way he manages to get close to the box without being vulnerable to it. Then he thinks that the dragon's shockwave might be enough to destroy it. Haruto decides to test this theory in practice, and it causes a huge explosion, which leaves him injured since he converted mana to create that explosion. He gets angry at the box, claiming he's the one who's been feeding it mana. Without wasting time, Haruto wraps the box with his webs in an attempt to stop it. In doing so, he creates a kind of web sarcophagus. Ku notices that the protagonist used the relentless attack of the giant golems. Nanis realizes this too and is impressed. Not just her, but Moore and Arez as well. Even Sattoru, the loyal sidekick, praises the protagonist's performance. But the box doesn't give up, and Haruto realizes that won't be enough to stop it. He once again uses webs to protect himself, thinking that if he could just touch the box one more time, he might be able to contain it. With some effort, he manages to do it, and with the box wrapped in webs, he uses the dragon skill once more. This time, he not only manages to break the box, but also the heart that was inside it, creating a massive impact in the area. Even so, he feels satisfied since he got what he wanted. His system alerts that Haruto leveled up significantly because of it. It even rewarded him with a copy of the giant golem's heart. However, the function of this item is to generate infinite mana, something he already has, so he feels frustrated. On the other hand, he can copy this item as many times as he wants. Just imagine the possibilities, until Sattoru comes running and tries to hug him in celebration of his achievement. But the protagonist doesn't like the idea. Not just him, Ku also approaches and congratulates the protagonist on the great feat. Nanis, however, tells Ku that if he's going to praise someone, he should do it properly, otherwise it might not sound sincere. Ku just says that he needs to have a serious talk with Haruto as soon as they return. But the protagonist says that if Ku is interested in the golem's heart, he could sell it to him for a good price. Nanis tries to intervene, saying that Haruto should discuss important matters like this with the association, not like that. This sparks a discussion between Ku and Nanis, since they have different views about the golem's heart. Either way, the protagonist takes action. He hands the recovered Longsword to Arez and says he's truly sorry that all of this happened. Arez is happy and thanks him for keeping his promise. But then Moore confronts him, claiming that the protagonist just used the same dark ability as the enemy. Now that he mentioned it, Ku also reaches the same conclusion. But the protagonist tries to dodge the accusation, claiming he doesn't move through shadows. In fact, his spider ability leveled up, allowing him to move incredibly fast. And that's why they didn't see him reach the chest. Nanis says now's not the time for that, as they need to return immediately and interrogate the prisoners. In a desperate attempt, Takumi tries to convince Sila to reset the dungeon so they can escape. She calls him crazy, but ends up agreeing, saying this will be the last time. Takumi asks if it's because she found out about the guy who generates infinite mana, because if that's the case, he'd be worried if she suddenly forgot about the contract. A permanent restriction that will never allow her to betray her partner, a bracelet called Adamus Vows. He says Sila can never abandon him, and her parents' lives are in his hands. With that, Takumi tells her to reset the dungeon now, since he risked his life to save her, and now it's her turn to repay him. He also says the mana in this place should be more than enough for her to do it. After that, Haruto senses the mana surge and sees what Sila is doing. Then he tells everyone to run because the dungeon is about to be reset. Arez gets worried because if that happens, who knows how many alternate dimensions will appear this time. The protagonist is forced to step in, so he uses the shadow ability without worrying about being seen or not, and gets close to the girl to try to stop her. Haruto asks why she's doing this. In the middle of her sorrowful crying, Sila can't say a word. She just continues the procedure. The protagonist tries to stop Sila, pulling her away from the spot. By doing so, a massive wave of energy bursts out in the area. Ku tries to shield himself with his magical force shield, and Arez does the same, protecting herself and the others. But the dungeon begins to regenerate. The problem is, only those inside the force field manage to escape, since both the protagonist and Sila were left behind. Seeing everything collapsing, Sattoru becomes extremely worried about Haruto. Meanwhile, Nanis notices that the sky she's looking at resembles Tokyo's and asks what it means. Arez doesn't know for sure, until suddenly, someone calls out to Nanis. It's her father, who asks how she ended up there, who realizes that Shinoda Makoto is there and asks why. Makoto says that's exactly what he's wondering too. He also asks if they managed to conquer the dungeon safely, but he notices not everyone is present, and Ku is left without an answer. Not just him. Nanas and the others are worried about the protagonist. Inside the dungeon, Takumi asks why the place hasn't fully restored yet. Sila replies that Haruto intervened and that's why she couldn't complete the process. Takumi says that doesn't matter because either way the others left and he's now free to act, and as long as he keeps the giant golem's heart, everything will be fine. However, the protagonist has no intention of handing it over so easily and tries to use the spider ability to defend himself. But his system alerts him that he can't use it right now, which leaves Haruto totally confused. Sila has just realized that what was reset wasn't the dungeon, it was herself. The same goes for the protagonist. He notices in his system that all of his attributes were reset and only the copy and paste ability remains, but at level 1. However, his system alerts that an unconfirmed object was copied and can be pasted, something the protagonist doesn't understand. But before he could do anything, Haruto is attacked by Takumi. Takumi realized from the protagonist's desperation what had happened and took the chance to strike. Haruto knows that the cursed ability hasn't disappeared yet, and this unconfirmed copied object might be his former self before the reset. But he considers the possibility of staying as he is now, until Takumi is stopped. Surprisingly, Moore was also trapped in the dungeon and prevented the protagonist from being attacked again. The protagonist is shocked as he didn't expect to see him there. Moore tells Haruto to run and leave the enemy to him, claiming he's more useful outside, but Haruto says he can't do that. Then Takumi decides to act. He says he's on a much higher level than them, and the power gap is obvious, so a low-level hunter is no match for him. When attacked, Moore can't withstand it, and falls to the ground after being hit. Takumi says that either way he was going to attack the International Association, so he might as well start now. Moore says he just needs to hold out long enough, but before being struck again, Haruto steps in, taking the hit in Moore's place. The hunter doesn't understand, but Haruto says he doesn't need help and tells Moore to run while he still can. Then Takumi says they're talking too much, and with his next blow he slices Haruto in half, which shocks everyone present. Takumi manages to obtain the golem's heart, saying he was sure that even with his stats reset, the hunter still kept his inventory. He also tells Sila that he's the only one she can trust, and is certain that the boy panicked when he realized she had restored him to his original state. Takumi also claims that he's probably in the afterlife grateful, since he lost everything anyway. Suddenly, Takumi is caught off guard and has his hand cut off, and screams in pain. Haruto appears and thanks him for killing him, saying he was worried the enemy wouldn't finish the job. With that, both Sila and Moore are stunned. Takumi is in total disbelief, as he truly thought the protagonist had died, and asks what kind of ability allowed him to return. Furious, he charges at the protagonist to try to kill him again. But Haruto apparently has all his abilities back and traps him in spider webs. Takumi tries to escape using his shadow movement ability, but he can't, and he orders Sila to reset the dungeon again. She says she can't do that. Takumi quickly reminds her of the contract they have and threatens that if she doesn't want to die, she has to obey his orders. The bracelet that binds Sila to the contract causes her pain for not following the contractor's command. Haruto realizes this and notices that the reason she's following orders from someone so vile is because of that bracelet, so he runs to the girl. In order to help her break free, he grabs the bracelet. Using his dragon's shockwave, he manages to break the item. This way, Sila feels free and even gets emotional. Takumi, in turn, is foaming with rage, craving revenge against the protagonist. He gets even more furious for not being able to use his abilities. The protagonist says that's because he's now in control of Takumi's ability. He then strikes the enemy, who is now completely vulnerable. After being hit, Takumi is finally defeated, and Haruto sees the giant golem's heart once again. He says that because of this item, an entire dungeon was created, and many people died in the process. Using the shockwave again, he destroys the heart, claiming that people like Takumi don't deserve to have it. By doing so, he obtains an important item, as he was the one who cleared the dungeon. Right after, the door to the heart's chamber opens, allowing the hunters outside to come in. They are from the same team as Ku and recognize the protagonist. The leader asks where the others are. Haruto says they split up, but there's nothing to worry about. They ask if that means the protagonist cleared the dungeon alone. Haruto says he just finished clearing it a little before they arrived, but now he wants to leave with them. The next day, already outside the dungeon, Haruto reunites with the others. Inside the headquarters of the Japanese Hunters Organization, a meeting between the directors is taking place, as everyone becomes aware of all that has happened. Shinoda Makoto says it's unbelievable that the Golem Heart Dungeon opened multi-dimensions, as this is a major issue that affects not only them. Gu says he understands that now, and it also clarifies why creatures from other places appeared in the city. Fuwa says what matters most is that all of this is connected to the hunter Nishirara, because the multidimensional dungeon is a sign of the disaster that occurred 5 years ago. But the others believe it's still too early to judge, since only one multidimensional dungeon collapsed, and now that everything has calmed down, they don't want to go into more detail. Nanas hears all of this and becomes irritated. She apologizes but says she's leaving as she needs to investigate the enemies of the Blood Tower because they won't be able to solve this problem without doing that. Gyu says Nanas is acting arrogantly, as if they were just fooling around, but claims they were also busy dealing with the situation. Ku tries to ease the tension. He says that although they don't know everything, he knows the guild masters fought hard to clear out the monsters that attacked. However, Gu says it's not like he wants to brag about his achievement. He just wants to make it clear that he wasn't sitting around doing nothing. On the other hand, he refers to the protagonist as the guy who cleared the dungeon alone, though he still doesn't know exactly who he is and asks who exactly is Haruto. The protagonist answers that he's just a simple hunter, but Gu doesn't like the response and asks if Haruto knows who he's talking to. Haruto asks what that's supposed to mean. After all, Gu cleared the hidden dungeon with minimal sacrifices and even discovered the dangerous multi-dimensional dungeon, and wonders if Gu shouldn't be praised instead of being known simply as the Master Taikuchi of the Midas Guild. Gu says the protagonist has a big mouth and states that even knowing who he is, he still acts this insolently. Seeing Gu like this, even Ku is taken aback, and the others ask if Gu seriously plans to activate his stone armor right there, until Fua steps in. He says that if Gu continues, he won't receive the reward for containing the dungeon collapse. Though displeased, Gu backs off, and says that this time, the protagonist got away. But in Haruto's mind, he can only wonder, could he copy that stone armor ability? Shortly after, President Fua gathers everyone in his office and directly asks Haruto which association he's affiliated with. He replies that he used to be affiliated with the Daikon Guild, but due to several circumstances, chose to operate as a freelancer. Fua says that for a solo hunter, clearing an advanced dungeon is truly impressive. Either way, he thanks him on behalf of the association. Haruto feels pleased to be recognized by the president of the organization. The president also thanks the other hunters and asks what they plan to do next. Arez says she intends to return to her association, while Moore wants to stay. He also says he'll be resigning from the International Association. Later that night, the protagonist receives an unexpected visit at his house and asks what they're doing there at that hour. Moore says he no longer works for the International Association and wants to count on the protagonist's help for now. Arez asks why, but Moore says he can't explain his reasons at the moment. Sattoru says he wants to stay with the protagonist too. Nana says she's only there because she wants to clear up a few doubts. By the way, Haruto asks, where are the prisoners now? Nanas reveals that Takumi is receiving treatment at the organization's hospital and will be transferred to a prison for interrogation as soon as he recovers. As for Sila, she's currently being interrogated by the association, but she refuses to provide any information and remains silent. The only thing she said is that she wants to see Haruto in person, something that leaves him thoughtful. Nanas notices there's something between them that she still doesn't understand. She also says Sila is a member of a very popular idol group. Sattoru says he actually realized he had seen her face before, he just didn't know from where. The protagonist says he destroyed the bracelet that bound Sila to Takumi, so they no longer have a connection, and agrees to go see her later. He also asks why Ku is there since he was the only one who hadn't said anything yet. Ku says there's only one reason he's there. Moore says that if he's after the golem's heart, it's too late. Haruto destroyed it while still in the dungeon. This fact leaves everyone surprised. The most outraged is Ku, who can't believe the protagonist destroyed something so valuable. However, Haruto asks for a moment and pulls the golem's heart from his inventory. He claims that the heart he destroyed was a fake, though he knows he actually copied the item and destroyed only a duplicate. But that excuse doesn't convince Moore, since he was there and saw everything. Besides, the dungeon couldn't have been cleared if the real heart hadn't been destroyed. In any case, Ku remembers that the protagonist offered to sell the item and offers 5 billion for it. Nanas in turn tells him not to accept that price because the item is worth much more and offers 8 billion on behalf of the association. Sattoru shows on his phone that rare items like that start at 10 billion in auctions, so he says the protagonist shouldn't accept anything less. Ku says the boy is just getting in the way and reminds them that Haruto promised to sell the item to him, so he raises his offer to 20 billion. The protagonist accepts the offer and sells the item. Not only that, but he comes out on top, since he can copy the heart as many times as he wants. With that, he thinks he can clone the item endlessly and auction it online, becoming filthy rich with ease. And on top of that, he celebrates that he's almost reached level 300. Not only that, but he also obtained a unique item for clearing the dungeon. His system alerts him that this is a sealed item, and the protagonist can break the seal by injecting mana into it, which he agrees to do. The item transforms into a dimensional fragment. His system alerts that if he collects all 5 fragments, he'll be able to open portals to any dimension he wants. Haruto realizes that this is a 5-piece item that functions as a key and that he'll have to collect the remaining 4, but he considers copying it until he has all 5. When he tries to do that, his system warns that this item cannot be copied, so he realizes he'll have to do it the hard way, find the other parts on his own, until Moore appears in his room and says he needs to confirm something with Haruto, but the protagonist notices something odd. Moore draws his sword in front of Haruto, leaving the protagonist completely confused. Without saying anything else, Moore attacks him and stabs Haruto in the chest with his sword. A flashback shows that 15 years ago, Europe was struck by a massive catastrophe. In the midst of it, a dragon called Drake attacked multiple locations with its fire, and hunters tried to fight back, including a super powerful mage, who faced the dragon head-on with her magic. But from afar, the others noticed the dragon wasn't even scratched and wondered if it was even possible to defeat such a monster. Their doubts only grew when they saw the dragon breathe fire, which destroyed everything in its path, including high-level warriors. One of those who witnessed it was none other than Moore, who was advised by a companion not to fight the enemy because of its extraordinary strength. But Moore didn't want to retreat because he saw the arrival of an abnormal monster that plunged the world into hell. However, as a newly awakened rookie hunter, he believed his recklessness would lead to his death. Until someone appeared to help him, someone Moore admired. Moore saw with his own eyes the world-famous hunter Frederick Q, and he thanked the heavens, thinking this was his salvation. But to both their misfortune, Frederick was attacked by the dragon, who defeated him with a single bite. At least that's what Moore initially believed, because right after, the dragon sensed something unusual. After devouring Frederick, it felt something strange inside. Several explosions occurred inside its body, and from the inside out, it exploded. Moore was confused by what he saw, but realized Frederick had an ace up his sleeve. He began to admire him even more. Even so, Moore didn't understand how his favorite hunter had done that, until someone appeared yelling at Frederick, saying they warned him not to use that trick in front of others. However, the renowned hunter defended himself, saying it was an emergency, and he had to act quickly. Nishihara Haruka, his partner, said that at least they managed to defeat the dragon, though much of the country had been destroyed. Frederick approached Moore and asked him to keep what he had seen a secret, which for Moore was easy to do. After all, it was a request from his favorite hero. Then, other hunters arrived and saw that the dragon had been defeated. The couple took that opportunity to leave quietly and avoid attracting more attention. Before that, the newly awakened one introduces himself as Moore Grant and asks his hero not to forget him. Frederick then promises that he will remember the young man. Moore once stood before a warrior who transcended death, but after that, he had no idea he'd encounter someone else with that same ability. Back in the present, he wants to make sure he's not wrong. And even knowing it's reckless, he wants to confirm with his own eyes whether the protagonist really has such an ability. However, to his surprise, Haruto escapes and grabs his sword. With that, Moore realizes that the protagonist truly has the same ability as Frederick Q to escape death. He apologizes for the inconvenience but says he had to be certain. Then, upon seeing the whole situation, Sattoru asks what's going on. The protagonist had forgotten the boy was there and realizes now they've got a serious problem. Shortly after, Moore kneels and apologizes again for what he did, but the protagonist insists it's not necessary. Arez blames herself, saying she heard that when someone commits a major crime in the East, that's how they apologize. But Haruto says that if you kill someone, a dojeza isn't enough. Regarding that, Moore says he'll make up for it by siding with the protagonist from now on, but Haruto says that's a decision for both of them to make. By the way, Sattoru asks if Haruto really has the same resurrection ability as Frederick Q, something Haruto didn't want being spread around. Either way, since Sattoru gets excited about everything the protagonist does, this wouldn't be any different, which is why Haruto wanted to keep him out of it. But now he realizes that Arez still hasn't gone home, and he asks why. She replies that she couldn't leave without talking to him about something. She reveals that she also has one of the 5 multidimensional fragments. Haruto asks if Arez's dimensional piece suddenly started resonating. She says yes, and followed the reaction of the piece into this room. Arez was also surprised and realizes her piece is number 1. And Haruto's is number 5, so she asks how the protagonist obtained his. Haruto says it was from destroying the golem's heart. As a reward, he received the fragment. Arez says she found hers mixed in with some of her mother's belongings, and according to her mother's records, a fragment resonates when it's near another, so that's how she managed to find him. The protagonist thinks that with this information, finding the other 3 fragments will be easier. Curious, Sattoru asks what exactly these fragments do. Arez says that supposedly, with all 5 gathered, The user can open doors to any dimension they wish. Haruto asks if that means it would be possible to open any dimensional dungeon. Arez replies yes. Just like the giant golem's heart dungeon, it would be possible to open others using the fragments they already have, making the process of finding the remaining fragments much easier. With that, the protagonist understands that the real reason Arez came to Japan was precisely to obtain more information about these fragments. She believes her parents are alive in another dimension. Moore agrees, as he doesn't believe they died. Sattoru asks if the fact that they haven't returned yet means the door to their dimension can only be opened from this side. Arez says that's a possibility, or they might just be waiting for the right moment to return. Meanwhile, Haruto thinks they might have chosen not to come back for some reason. Perhaps other disasters, just as terrible as the one 15 years ago, have emerged elsewhere. In any case, he says that if they can open and close the dimensional gate with the key, they'll be able to seal multidimensional dungeons and prevent another catastrophe. Sattoru looks at the fragments and asks how they could be the key. Then his golem ends up touching them, and the fragments bump into each other, taking on a different form than before, and also causing a huge flash of light in the room. The boy gets super scared, thinking he's going to die, but realizes it was just the fragments merging. Arez is also surprised by this. She thought they'd only merge once all 5 were gathered, but just 2 were enough for them to combine. She also says the resonance sound got louder, but she wasn't the only one to realize this, because the other scattered fragments out there are also resonating, and the Elf Midsell says that the humans who possess the other pieces must definitely be extraordinary, and now is the time to finally return home. At the headquarters of the Starfield Guild in Europe, Lord Michael reports that the Blood Tower Guild failed its mission and asks why the elf is laughing. Midsell congratulates the Lord for finally learning the teleportation skill and says he is close to reaching transcendence. Michael says that for now, he can only move short distances, and the skill can only be improved by using the copy ability. Because of that, the elf believes he'll soon achieve what he desires. Michael asks why Midsell thinks that. She says her fragment is resonating significantly, which means at least one of the other fragments has been connected, making it easier to find the rest. Michael says that means all 5 pieces have been discovered, and Midsell will soon be able to return to her homeland. He asks if there are no more keys in the dimension of her home. The elf says there actually is a dimensional key there as well, but now the door to that dimension cannot be opened from that side. 15 years ago, that damned witch, Nishihara Haruka, sealed all the doors to dimensions connected to Earth. The dimensional keys on Earth's side too. They were split into 5 pieces and hidden in different places separately. Michael then understands that if they put the pieces together and unlock the key, the dimensional door will connect again. Midsell agrees. She says that first they will need to open the dimensional door to her homeland in the fairy realm, to the sacred cosmic tree Yggdrasil, because there a gift exists similar to copying, and if absorbed, it will allow the growth of other gifts as well. Michael agrees that this is a good plan, but asks the elf if she was also surprised when she first saw his ability. He says he knows very well Midsell's true intentions, and he also knows that her dimension was corrupted when the cosmic tree was tainted centuries ago, and is now on the verge of collapse, called the Dark Yggdrasil. When Earth and the Elven Dimension were first connected 15 years ago during the Great Disaster, the Elves tried to shift the source of corruption to Earth, but Nishihara stopped them and ruined their plans. The Elves' true goal is to reconnect the Elven Dimension and Earth to carry out the plan that failed, so Michael knows he's just being used for that purpose. But he claims he doesn't care about any of that, because he'll use the elf to open the multidimensional dungeon and absorb even more abilities. If that means becoming like the transcendent ones, he doesn't care what happens to this world, and from now on, he'll act personally. However, Midsell says he's the leader of Starfield, the great multinational guild. If he moves without reason, it could attract suspicion and unnecessary attention. She also says that as a precaution, she's already ordered Lucas to execute Plan B, and as soon as everything is ready, she will personally give Lord Michael a legitimate reason to act. Far from there, in an advanced dungeon in Japan, strong creatures called gnolls are about to attack. Sattoru is anxious and tells the protagonist there are many of them. Moore is with them too and says they should retreat for now, but Haruto thinks about how he had to ask a favor from the hunter Nanas and begged her to accompany them to this dungeon. But now his companions want to fall back, something he's not at all willing to do, because he believes this is the perfect opportunity to level up his golem. So he tells all the enemies to come at him with everything they've got. The enemies then act fiercely, which worries the protagonist's friends, but Haruto never hesitates. Instead, he summons several mini-golems to help him. This leaves his friends quite impressed. Haruto celebrates because this is exactly what he wanted. Moore, however, is stunned and wonders how this is even possible. The golems head toward the enemies, but the gnolls seem to have some advantage. Sattoru is concerned, as the enemies are strong, and their vitality and level are different. However, the golems retaliate, and prove to be stronger than they appear. They group up in clusters, attacking every gnoll in sight, Soon Sattoru realizes the protagonist had everything under control from the start. Upon seeing his golems defeat the enemies, Haruto realizes their durability and power have indeed increased. But when he tries to send them back to his inventory, he realizes he no longer has storage space, because depending on the size, the summon also takes time. There's no better way to do this, until Sattoru suggests the protagonist ask Master Kinosaki for help. Since he's a dungeon nerd, he probably knows something useful. The protagonist agrees that this might be a good idea. After leaving the dungeon, they get in Satoru's car. Haruto didn't know the guy could drive. Satoru says he got the car from his father on his coming-of-age birthday. In his daily life, Haruto often forgets, but this reminds him that Sattoru is the son of the leader of one of the most influential groups in his country. He then calls Nanas and asks if she's heading to the association now. Sattoru says this was sudden and asks if everything is okay. The protagonist thinks it's probably related to Sila, and he needs to see her as soon as possible, so he tells Sattoru to hurry up. Shortly after, they all arrive at the place where the girl is being kept under surveillance. Right away, Haruto notices that she's not doing well at all. Nana says she's been silent for 3 days, refusing to eat or drink anything, as she insists on speaking only with Haruto. The protagonist asks if he can speak to her without being recorded, but Nana says that's not possible, as it could interfere with the recording. Haruto fears that his copying ability might be exposed, but he also really wants to copy the girl's ability and restore her, so he accepts the risk. He enters the room with a glass of water. He says there's nothing in the glass besides water, and insists that she drink a little. After sitting in front of her, the girl grabs the glass and drinks as if she were dying of thirst. Seeing this, Nana says the girl was close to dehydration. Haruto starts by asking if she already knows about his ability to generate infinite mana. Sila says that if Haruto helps her, she will cooperate with the investigation, but before that, the protagonist wants to confirm something. He asks if her main ability is to revert anything to its previous state. The girl answers yes. Haruto confirms his suspicions and realizes he wasn't the only one cursed. He quickly thinks that if he manages to copy that ability, it means he'll be able to copy any similar power. He realizes that unlike what he thought, Sila's ability isn't healing, but rather returning things to their original form. This is why she managed to fix the sword. Unlike her, Sattoru doesn't understand how it works or how powerful this ability can be. Back in the room, Sila says her parents have been in a coma for a long time and asks the protagonist for help to heal them, since only he can generate the mana her family needs. Haruto agrees to help her with that. But first he says he's going to do something a little rude, which leaves everyone outside very confused. The protagonist frees the girl from her handcuffs and touches her hand, specifically to copy her ability. But what surprises him is that his copying ability doesn't work on her, leaving him stunned, as his system alerts him that it will be impossible to do so. Sila doesn't understand and asks what Haruto is doing. Realizing the situation has become awkward, the protagonist lets go of her hand. Then he receives another alert saying that if he erases the target, forced absorption becomes possible. Only then will copying be viable in the future. He realizes he would have to kill the girl and anyone else with such a restriction, something he doesn't want to do. Even though he doesn't know her well, the protagonist isn't a killer, and he doesn't intend to get what he wants at any cost. But he really does want to copy her ability and tries to think of another way. Outside, Sattoru asks why Haruto is acting weird. Nanas uses the microphone to ask him if everything is okay. He says yes and realizes he'll have to handle the situation carefully. So he decides to first listen to Sila's request and earn her trust, hoping to find a good solution eventually. After that, the protagonist agrees to visit the girl's parents and help them recover. That same day, they head to the hospital. Sila says that during the Great Disaster, she and her family were attacked by a mysterious monster, and this is the only hospital capable of treating her parents. Haruto thinks that whoever is hospitalized there must be the reason behind the partnership with Takumi, probably to cover the hospitalization cost. He asks if Takumi is hospitalized there. Nanas says yes, he's in the basement and after recovery will be transferred to a prison for interrogation. Nanas asks if Sila is okay. She says she is, until Moore, who is with them, notices something strange about a man walking by and wonders what that person is doing there. This man heads to another floor, where the security is notably reinforced. Seeing the man approach, the guards tell him to stop, as only authorized personnel can go beyond that point. But the mysterious man shows a badge and says he wants to pass. However, upon seeing the supposed badge, the guard realizes it was actually just a random piece of paper. This moment of distraction was his downfall, because it allowed him to take care of the guards. They are possessed by a dark aura, and become submissive to whoever summoned that shadow. The mysterious man tells the guards to move and find the necessary items. That way he is left with no obstacles. Then he starts forming a magic orb, which is covered in dark magic. A flashback reveals that this is Lord Lucas, and Midsell assigned him this mission, saying Lucas is the only one capable of completing it. She says there's a chance the Blood Tower might fail the mission and tells him to place that magic orb in various places around Tokyo. Lucas asks what it is. She says it's a contaminated fruit from Yggdrasil, a tree from her homeland. With this fruit, it's possible to create a barrier and open subspace. Upon hearing that, Lucas is a bit confused, but the elf says he needs to see it to believe it. As soon as Lucas sees what Midsell shows him, he's shocked. The elf then says that in this dimension with just one fruit, this is the limit of what she can show, and she would like Lord Lucas to create a reason for Starfield and Michael to act openly. Back to the present, Lucas thinks that Midsell wants to cause a dungeon break in the center of Tokyo. He doesn't like it much, but knows he can't back down now, since his family and Starfield have deep connections. At the hospital, Sila's father receives treatment and wakes from his coma. As he looks to the side, he sees that his wife has also been healed, and his daughter is present as well. Seeing this family reunion makes Sattoru extremely emotional, but his sister doesn't like seeing him that way, and isn't pleased to see him crying. Sattoru praises the protagonist, saying not even high-level healers could cure patients who were in a coma for so long. Nanis thinks this revert ability is incredible, and if used correctly, that girl should be part of the association. Soon, she concludes that she needs to monitor this directly. In the midst of this, the protagonist notices Moore's absence and asks about him, but Arez doesn't know where he is either. In the same hospital, Lucas tries to leave, accompanied by Takumi, until he receives an alert in his system, saying that a revert ability user is nearby, so he asks if Takumi knows anything about it. Takumi hears that and knows exactly who Lucas is referring to. He realizes he's in the same hospital as Sila's parents and wonders if the man who freed him is now among his enemies. Right after that, Lucas hears someone calling him. Moore approaches and says that because of the hat, he almost didn't recognize him. He wondered why someone from the International Hunter Association was in Japan, but now realizes his target is Starfield's dog, Kurosaki Takumi. Lucas says he heard Moore left the International Association and asks what he's doing there. Moore simply says that Takumi is a dangerous criminal, and the fact that someone is trying to free him automatically makes them a potential enemy. Trying to argue, Lucas says they can't fight here since they're in a hospital. Takumi asks for a sword to fight and says it'll be easy since Moore is alone and won't be able to do anything with his abilities. Suddenly, Haruto appears and says Moore isn't alone. Upon seeing the protagonist use his shadow ability, Takumi becomes furious. While they're taunting each other, Lucas analyzes the protagonist and realizes he has the ability to copy and paste other abilities. He immediately gets excited for finally having found this person. Amid all the confusion, Nana shows up to confront the fugitive. Takumi is completely caught off guard. Along with him, Lucas is impressed to see what he calls the Sword Witch and wonders if she's some kind of final boss. Nanis, in turn, simply says their horoscopes are not looking favorable today, standing before the hunters. Takumi suggests they resist, but Lucas doesn't respond until a pair of handcuffs is tossed to them. They aren't normal handcuffs. They're devices that restrict abilities. Nanis says that if they agree to use the device, everything will be resolved peacefully. But Takumi finds it too humiliating, so he grabs a woman as a hostage. Takumi says this is a hospital, so if a fight breaks out, people will get hurt, and he knows the hunters don't want that. He claims this is his way of being peaceful. However, what he didn't expect was for Nanis to charge at him. The kick Takumi took sent him flying like a ball. And not just that, but besides the kick, he suffered massive damage, even coughing up blood. Lucas realizes that the attack was so fast that not even he could see it, until Nanis calls his attention. She says that Lucas seems to be different from Takumi, so she suggests resolving this peacefully. When he looks at the state Takumi is in, Lucas seriously reflects on it, and wonders if he and Takumi are really that different. Earlier, he asked Midsell why he was chosen for this mission. The elf said that the cosmic tree had been contaminated by dark mana, and normal humans could be poisoned by this mana. But she says Lucas is different and cannot be affected. The same goes for the master of the Blood Tower. This information takes Lucas by surprise. Midsell says that Kurosaki Takumi also violated the international treaty by using abilities that require dark mana, and in order to make the contaminated cosmic tree bloom, they need to use abilities that depend on dark mana. Remembering the elf's words, along with the fact that Lucas once contaminated the security guards, makes him think that he really is the same as Kurosaki Takumi. Thus, he believes this can't be resolved peacefully. So he draws his sword and says that he needs Kurosaki Takumi alive, so he'll take him no matter what. Nanis realizes that his sword is no ordinary weapon. Moore comes to the same conclusion when he sees that it's the rapier Angelus, which makes him think Lucas is truly serious. He says that this sword was passed down for generations in Lucas's family. one of the Holy Knight bloodlines of Great Britain, and it's the only holy sword in the world. Not only that, but the sword is on the same level as the Collision Dragon, though Rapier Angelus is specialized in slashing rather than stabbing. Lucas says that's right, but unlike the Longsword, it has no attack power, it adjusts levels, and is also known as the Inquisitor of Heretics, and it can nullify all abilities and weapons it deems heretical. As a result, the hunter Nanas, who uses the magical sword Witchblade, is affected as well. Nanas defends herself with her weapon, but she realizes that it's indeed inferior to her opponent's sword, and that puts her at a disadvantage. Seeing this makes the protagonist worried about her. However, Nanas tells him not to interfere since they're in a hospital, and she doesn't want to cause more chaos, so she manages to defend herself and take control of the situation, which surprises Lucas as he didn't think that was possible. Nanas takes advantage of this moment of distraction and attacks, but she narrowly misses a direct hit, and Lucas asks if she's not going to use her abilities just because they're in a hospital. He also asks if she thinks she can face his sword like that. Lucas tries to act as if he has the upper hand, but every time Nanas attacks, he's caught off guard, because her strength gets closer and closer to hitting him. And even when defending her attacks, Lucas ends up getting hit and even bleeds just by blocking her strike. His internal organs are damaged even before their swords fully clash. The level difference between them is big, as she is the 10th strongest in the world. In turn, Nanas asks if her opponent is ready to be peaceful now. Lucas feels cornered, as he thought this would be easier. He's in a hospital, and just like Nanas, he doesn't want to use his abilities inside, until someone interrupts their fight, which draws both of their attention. Haruto has just noticed something the others didn't. Takumi used the distraction from the fight to activate one of Yggdrasil's poison fruits. He says that the hospital they're protecting so strongly is about to vanish completely from existence. Lucas tries to interfere and convince Takumi not to do this. Takumi says the plan was to place these fruits in important locations around Tokyo, and in this case, they should have installed it in this hospital as well. The protagonist asks what Takumi is talking about. Moore says this is dark mana, and says it's widely used by dark magic users, and apparently Takumi is one of them. But there's a lot of dark mana building up, and if this continues, the normal people in the hospital will be poisoned by the dark mana. So the protagonist acts to try to stop it, using his spider webs. But Takumi says it's already too late for that. Haruto doesn't understand what that means, until he realizes that the fruit is what's spreading the dark mana, and roots emerge from the fruit. Roots that destroy the hospital, spreading across floors, and going straight into the ground, birthing a massive shadowy tree. A sort of crater opens up in the hospital, with patients almost falling into it, and a rescue task force is immediately mobilized, until a woman falls into the hole, but she is rescued by the protagonist, who used spider webs. After getting her out of danger, Haruto tells her to follow the evacuation orders and get out of there as soon as possible. She then stands up and thanks him. The protagonist thinks there are many people there, but that's not the real problem, because many of the patients can't even move on their own. He's not the only one helping. Nanas is taking care of some children, while Moore is also helping. However, the hospital is covered in dark mana, and if it stays like this, everyone will be corrupted by it. The only option would be to restore the hospital to what it was before. Elsewhere, some people are trapped under debris, but Sattoru uses his small golem to rescue them, until the protagonist shows up, and Sattoru asks what really happened there. Haruto simply asks if things are under control there, and Sattoru says the situation didn't get worse only thanks to Arez. Speaking of which, Haruto hasn't seen her since the impact, so Sattoru takes him to where she is, and Haruto notices there's an area covered in ice. Arez says she was the one who created that barrier, which actually helped prevent the hospital's infirmary from being destroyed. However, she couldn't completely block the dark mana. Either way, the protagonist is glad to see she's safe, but he tells Sila that the entire hospital was destroyed and is now overtaken by dark mana that's everywhere. So the fastest way to fix this is to restore the entire place, but he knows she used her powers not long ago and asks if she can do it again. Sila says yes, because compared to a dungeon, restoring a hospital is no big deal, and with him nearby, mana won't be a problem. Shortly after, they reach the epicenter of it all, where the tree had grown. Sattoru comments that the tree is bigger than he imagined, and asks how something like that could appear out of nowhere. Haruto says it was Takumi's fault, who planted the tree and then fled. Sila thinks Takumi did that even knowing his parents were there, and concludes he didn't care at all, which only increases her anger toward him. In any case, they need to restore the hospital quickly, so the protagonist provides the mana the girl needs. Then Sila touches the tree, and begins the restoration process. Haruto starts to feel the effects, but sees that the process is working. As the roots begin to retreat, everyone watches anxiously, since such a process is truly impressive in every way. The tree even retracts some of its roots. However, it suddenly begins to resist the reversal. Not only that, it also attacks. which makes Sila realize the danger. Haruto notices it too, as a lot of dark mana is being emitted from the tree, so he rushes to Sila to try and protect her, and creates a web barrier for protection. Then he uses his shadow movement ability to escape from the tree with her. Sattoru comes closer and asks if he's okay. He answers yes, but Sila isn't, as she was hit and the restoration process was interrupted. He quickly tells Sattoru to take charge of the evacuation and start moving everyone out before they're consumed by the dark mana. So Sattoru picks up Sila and begins the evacuation. Arez, meanwhile, stays close, and the protagonist asks what she knows about this. She replies that based on her mother's information, this comes from another dimension, a corrupted fruit of the cosmic tree called Yggdrasil, a fruit that may have been captured and brought there, and since the main body of the tree exists in another dimension, the restoration spell probably didn't work on it. The fruit acts like a barrier, so it was likely placed in 3 or 4 key areas around Tokyo. 10 minutes later, in front of the hospital, the rescue team tries to work as fast as they can. Meanwhile, mage hunters try to keep the place as stable as possible. They also try to cleanse the area of dark mana, but that task is not easy to solve. Fua, who is also present, says that if he weren't seeing it with his own eyes, he wouldn't believe it, since a fruit from the cosmic tree appeared right in Tokyo. Then Nana shows up with the others, and says she has more news about Takumi and Lucas. Du asks how Nanes let someone so important escape, and also asks what connection an international hunter has with Lucas in all of this. Speaking of which, Hu mentions that the Blood Tower is a Japanese guild, and asks why someone from the International Association would be interested in a local leader. Anyway, he intends to capture Takumi again and question him about it personally. But right after, he senses something different happening. The ground starts shaking, like an earthquake, and everyone thinks the hospital is about to collapse, until someone shows up saying they have serious problems, because another tree has appeared, this time in the Kita area. This surprises even the protagonist, as he didn't expect another tree to appear so soon. With the appearance of the second mysterious tree, news spreads across Japan, reporting that the Hunters Association warned about the dangers of the dark mana exhaled by them, leaving the local population somewhat frightened since the government declared a state of calamity and ordered people to leave the Tokyo metropolitan area. Upon seeing this, Takumi is pleased, since his goal was to cause all this chaos anyway. He also praises Lucas' work, saying that before he showed up, he hadn't considered using dark mana against the population. The news continues, stating that as long as it doesn't exceed 24 hours, there's no threat of mana poisoning, so everyone should stay calm and follow the instructions provided by the police, as for now, they, the Hunters Association, and the self-defense forces are coordinating efforts to do everything they can to control the situation and keep everyone safe. In Takumi's car, he notices that the driver is being mentally controlled by Lucas, like a puppet. However, Lucas gets annoyed by the comment and claims he's not doing it because he enjoys it. Takumi calms him down and says he understands the situation, also mentioning that they're probably being frantically searched for, but he believes they'll never be found, because he claims their enemies would never imagine they're moving around in a police car, and once they plant 3 more trees, the plan will be complete. Meanwhile, in the office of the Japanese Association leader, Fua becomes aware that some trees have already been planted around Tokyo, and others may still appear. Arez says that according to his mother's notes, contaminated trees emerged in the city during the Great Disaster, and were responsible for opening portals for monsters to invade Tokyo, so something like that could happen again. This information catches everyone off guard, including the protagonist, who realizes the gravity of the situation. 15 years ago, routes similar to the current ones appeared throughout the city. Haruto was just a child riding in his father's car, until they had to flee to avoid being hit by the tree. Meanwhile, the protagonist's father wondered what was going on, but he didn't have much time to think, since he had to escape. However, the tree ended up being faster, and hit their car during the escape. Haruto isn't sure why he suddenly remembered this. He wonders if it could be linked to his curse, and also if whoever destroyed the car back then was really a monster or a contaminated tree. If it turns out to be the same people behind both incidents, he states that he'll never forgive them. Fua, in turn, says that he does remember trees like these appearing before, but as he was too busy with other matters, he didn't pay much attention. Arez says that according to his mother's journal, the barrier created by the contaminated tree opens a portal to another dimension, something like a subspace, but Ku says that if that were the case, there would be no need to use contaminated trees from another dimension to create the barrier. So he asks if this could be a portal to open the subspace of the Dark Spirit Grimoire. Nana says that to access the Dark Spirit's subspace, you need dark mana with a black aura, and a single contaminated tree might not be enough. Arez says it's a shot in the dark, but the subspace might open at this stage, and in the worst case scenario, it could even open a door to a contaminated dimension. The protagonist hears everything and knows that the subspace is infinite, so he concludes that if used correctly, it could solve the problem of his inventory. That way, he could control an army of golems, and no matter how much dark mana he'll need, he wants to find and take control of the subspace. Until someone interrupts his thoughts. Gu says he's never heard of a dimensional key capable of opening portals to other places and scoffs at the situation. But the protagonist shows him that the key is real, which leaves him extremely shocked. Arez says that this is his mother's legacy. She found one of the fragments and the other was found by Haruto in the dungeon at the heart of the giant golem. Gu realizes that this is indeed real and wonders if the two of them alone wouldn't be enough. Arez says that, according to her mother, the gate to the contaminated dimension opened in the United Kingdom, and she doesn't think it's a coincidence that the contaminated trees and the dimensional pieces appeared simultaneously, so someone must have brought the contaminated trees from another dimension. It's possible they also have the remaining dimensional pieces. Fua says that in the worst case scenario, the dimensional portal might open, and this is no longer just Japan's problem, so they should request international help from other associations. But Ku says that's impossible, since one of the dimensional pieces is stored in his guild. An hour later, at the future guild headquarters, Ku leads them to the underground storage. Gu says he always knew Ku liked dungeons, but didn't know he also had a dimensional piece. Speaking of which, the protagonist asks Ku how he got it. Gu says he doesn't even need to hear the answer because he knows Ku buys valuable things from the black market, although many of his items are fake. However, the protagonist knows this isn't the case because his fragment is resonating, which means another one is nearby. Then Ku opens the storage room door, and what seemed to be a place full of items turns out to be a warehouse just to store the fragment. Gu gets excited upon seeing it, but the protagonist says that from here on, only he and Ku will proceed. Left outside, Gu gets angry with Haruto. Arez tries to calm things down, claiming that it was already dangerous to combine two fragments, so they have no idea what will happen when three come together. Ku supports her and adds that this is his guild, and he's the one who gives orders here. Gu says he's seen enough to know it's real, and he's not interested in the rest, but if a strange dimension opens, he says it'll be their fault, and he'll kill them both for it. He warns them to keep that in mind. Inside, the protagonist realizes that Ku's piece is number 4. Haruto tries to ask where he got it, but Ku just tells him to stop asking unnecessary questions and move on with the procedure. He also says that if things get ugly, Haruto can use his barrier as defense, but the protagonist isn't worried about his safety, since he has plenty of abilities to protect himself. He approaches the fragment without even taking the other two out of his inventory. Even so, this causes a reaction in the item, which results in a massive explosion in the area that can be seen even from outside. Nanas worries about what could have happened inside, since she only saw the impact and not the aftermath. Inside, a huge trail of destruction has been left behind. Ku is somewhat outraged because on top of seeing everything destroyed, he assumes the protagonist is dead, until Haruto surprises him and says he really thought he was going to die this time. With that, Ku looks at him, realizing they both survived. The pieces fused, and Haruto barely escaped death. He sees the incredible power of the combined fragments and thinks that next time he'll have to be more cautious. Ku notices that unlike himself, Haruto barely made an effort to protect himself, since he escaped using his shadow movement ability and wonders who he really is. The protagonist tells Ku not to look at him like that, but then Ku does something unexpected. He grabs the protagonist by the neck and pins him to the ground. Haruto asks what's gotten into Ku all of a sudden. Ku says that you can't use shadow abilities without shadow mana, but just now Haruto used the shadow movement ability, so he demands an explanation. Cornered, the protagonist tries to come up with an excuse and wonders how he's going to get out of this one. With no escape, the protagonist can only try to talk his way out of it, so he claims he's not capable of using shadow mana. But Ku doesn't believe it, because if that were true, Haruto couldn't have moved through the shadows like he just did. Tired of talking, Ku attacks him. The protagonist gets badly injured, and not only that, he realizes he can't activate his shadow movement ability. Ku says that Haruto will be left without his tricks, since he was hit with blacklight magic, which prevents anyone affected from using shadow abilities. Haruto realizes that, like him, Ku also has his tricks. Ku says he's been suspicious of Haruto since the fight on the bridge against the dragon, and now he suspects that he and Kurosaki Takumi are working together, and he demands answers. The protagonist even feels offended, because he's doing the exact opposite. He wants to stop Kurosaki Takumi, not help him, but he needs to convince Ku of that. Just thinking about it makes him angry, on top of not being able to use all of his abilities. Then he asks if Ku is going to kill him over something so small, claiming it's not like he's an enemy of his family. Haruto manages to trap Ku in the webs, but he gets a bad feeling about it, as if he went too far with his words. Right after, Ku tries to break free, and when he does, he causes a huge commotion. A flash of light blinds the protagonist, until his vision returns and he sees that Ku has escaped the webs, and is now standing before him, ready to fight again. Ku says that if it's something Haruto can't talk about, then maybe it's a star on the map, and if that's the case, he'll have to kill him right there. The protagonist realizes that Ku is furious and intends to kill him, and he has gotten so used to this kind of situation that he forgot Ku is a hunter above level 500. He himself hasn't even reached level 300, and now there's only one option left. Haruto thinks it's now or never because he doesn't have time to think about anything else. So he pulls from his inventory a potion that restores 95% of the target's energy and heals their wounds. But right after, Ku attacks him again with black light. The protagonist barely has time to react and ends up getting hit directly. With no other options, he also pulls the collision sword from his inventory. Even though he didn't want to use such a resource against an ally, Haruto had no other choice and had to resort to it. Ku is struck, and even while defending himself, he realizes the strength of the blow, to the point where his magic barrier breaks, and he becomes vulnerable to attacks. Ku is then hit by the sword's power, and falls unconscious to the ground. At that moment, he begins to have a vision of his past, where, alongside his brother, he dreamed of creating a guild, and they even named it together, calling it the Guild of the Future. But first, his brother Sauda wanted to become the #1 hunter in the world rankings, and be the strongest among all. 10 years later, they were already working together, and even though the enemies and monsters were strong, the two of them together could handle the challenge. One time, Sauda said he had a bad feeling about their group because an unidentified hunter was among them, but his older brother said that this dungeon wasn't controlled by the Midas Guild or the Great Sages Guild. It was a hidden dungeon, super famous, and no one had rights over it, so that's how the Guild of the Future could jump into the nation's top 10. He also told Sauda not to be afraid, because his return ability could pull someone even from hell, and he promised that in any case, he would protect him from any danger. However, things didn't go as planned, because that very mysterious member turned against the group. He used dark magic on the boy and the others, stating that the more time they were exposed to it, the more their consciousness would be corrupted, and soon they would transform into low-level monsters, even worse than ghouls. Ku begged for the antidote because his younger brother was dying, but the mysterious one knew that by defeating the dungeon monsters, they had obtained a reward, the ability to move through shadows, and he said that in exchange for it, he would heal the boy, otherwise he would let him die. With no alternatives, Ku agreed to the exchange and demanded the antidote. The masked man mentioned that the sword passed down through generations, called Brilliance, is the only way to be saved from mana poisoning. Ku understands that there's no easier way to help his brother, as he had imagined an antidote would solve the problem, but it's something very hard to obtain. The masked man says there's no antidote for dark magic. Besides, the dungeon they are in is about to collapse, as it has already been cleared and serves no more purpose. So even if the antidote existed, it would be useless if they couldn't get out alive. Ku realizes that the enemy planned this from the very beginning, but the masked man says that there's no more time for discussion, as he needs to leave quickly if he wants to stay alive. After the enemy leaves, Ku asks if his brother could use his return ability. Sauda shows him an item he found in the boss room, a fragment he didn't know the origin of, but said it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Ku immediately scolds him, saying now is not the time to talk nonsense, because they need to get out of there. But his brother says he can't leave with him. Then he uses his ability on Ku, sacrificing himself to save his brother. After that, a magical portal opens and takes Ku to another place. But he breaks down in tears as he was the only one who escaped. He managed to do it. He brought the object his brother gave him, but that didn't ease his anger in the slightest. Back to the present, Ku wakes up and says that for the past 10 years he's been searching for that same dungeon but hasn't found it. He doubts his brother is still alive, yet he never stopped looking. Haruto realizes that Ku wants to find him, even if it's only his remains. No wonder Ku is called a dungeon otaku. The cost of provoking Master Ku's wrath is high. Thanks to the berserk ability of the Longsword, Haruto briefly reached level 600 in power, but his body can't withstand it. Ku says he's researched everything about shadow mana, and he knows that shadow movement is a rare and forbidden ability. No one but his brother's killer should be able to use it. Realizing that Ku suspects him, the protagonist sees no other option but to tell the truth. But Ku interrupts him and says there's no need, because after seeing him use the sword against him, he concluded that both the shadow ability and the Longsword power were stolen by Haruto, so he's not the killer, and he apologizes for suspecting him. Haruto accepts the apology, but doesn't like being called a thief. Ku says everything makes sense now, and furthermore, he realizes Haruto also stole the Dragon Kushia's ability. He also says he has 2 more things to point out. When the dimensional key is complete, they'll join Haruto, but he tells him to stay away from Kurosaki Takumi, because he claims Takumi is his, and he wants to handle it alone. Haruto agrees. Speaking of Takumi, he's still out there causing trouble, making Tokyo his own personal playground. After coming to an understanding, the two leave the warehouse. Moore asks what happened. Haruto simply says there was a small issue when combining the fragments. Nana says that while they were inside, news came that a new contaminated tree appeared in Tokyo. Furious, Ku asks where Kurosaki Takumi is. Arez says they might be able to predict his next move based on where the last tree was planted. But before that, she says they need to gather all the hunters around Ginza. Judging by the barrier's size and location, the subspace will open there. With that, Nanas concludes the number of monsters will be quite large, like a horde. Haruto thinks that if that happens, it will take time to bring them down, and no matter how strong he is, he won't be able to deal with them using only giant spider silk. Ku says he'll head out first with his guild to find Kurosaki, because he believes everything will be fine if they find him before the fourth tree is planted. On the other hand, Nanas says she'll return to the association's headquarters to unite the remaining guilds and asks the others if they'd consider joining her team. For his part, the protagonist says he'd rather prepare what he needs and act alone. Nanas asks why. Haruto says the subspace is vast and massive, so the battle is about numbers. With that, she understands what the protagonist means. Ku tells Haruto to give it his all. He can't wait to see what he'll do. The protagonist says he'll need Moore's help with something, and Moore asks if his talent will finally be recognized. Haruto asks what he's talking about and says Moore is just hauling the luggage. Far from there, at the Starfield's headquarters in Europe, Midsell says a support request from Japan just arrived. Apparently, they asked the US too, and says the time has come. Michael says he'd heard the barrier isn't complete yet and asks if the subspace will open properly. She says yes. At this point, the subspace is protected on a large scale and already swarming with goblins and orc monsters. One of those present asks if she knows anything about the Japanese hunters and claims that only Takeuchi and Nanas could easily deal with these weak monsters. He also says that if they're asking for support, no matter how big the crowd is, they'll be wiped out quickly. On the other hand, Michael might have a harder time. But the elf says that's exactly why she went through the trouble of planting the contaminated trees, to make the subspace gate wider. The knight asks about the monsters, saying that even without the Americans' help, the Japanese would defeat them easily. However, the elf says if she were them, she wouldn't count on that. Michael says the tree and seeds come from the elf's land, so this time they must succeed in their mission. Midsell tells him not to worry. This isn't her first time opening subspace in Tokyo. Meanwhile, at the White House in the United States of America, Raymond Romeo, the president of the country, asks if it's true that 3 contaminated trees from another dimension have appeared in Japan. Logan Bauman, the CIA director, says yes, just like the trees that appeared in England 15 years ago and brought the subspace to light. He also says that the gates haven't opened yet, so there's no direct threat for now, but there is an official request for support from the Japanese Hunters Association. The president fears that the danger might reach the United States as well and asks how the International Hunters Association reacted. Logan says that Michael Starfield is the director of the International Hunters Association, and word is they're heading straight to Japan. The assistant asks if a hunter as famous as Michael has other reasons to go personally. Logan responds that national intelligence doesn't cover that, so they don't have the full picture. Then the assistant receives a call. She tells the president that the leader of the American Hunters Association is calling via video. With that, the president authorizes the connection. Simon DeFree, the leader, says they have a huge problem. The president says that if it's about the incident in Japan, he's already been informed and has taken action. But Simon says some things are out of control, because the Ouroboros Guild's aircraft reported that it was heading to Japan. Upon hearing this, the president asks if Turner is on that plane. Simon reveals that not only is he on board, but Turner also has all the guild's equipment. Logan says that power rivals the military strength of the US. Sending a hunter like him abroad is like launching a nuclear weapon. Furthermore, Japan is a pacifist country, and if this leaks, it'll be a major issue. But Simon says there's nothing they can do, since Turner is impossible to stop. The president says that the problem in Japan officially no longer exists and wants help to immediately select the best hunters and send them there, but instructs them to keep everything secret. Back in Tokyo, Lucas looks at one of the trees and thinks that now it truly resembles Kurosaki. He looks at his sword, which had been used for years to protect his family, but is now being used for personal gain, since all of this was caused by him. It all started the day Lucas received the curse, a kind of instant transcendental tracking that allowed him to see beyond his own eyes. All types of media information, people's resentments and desires flooded his mind. He could even sense the consciousness and deaths of monsters. After a week, Lucas was nearly unconscious, unable to do anything. In the end, he tried to take his own life to escape the curse. But ironically, that's when he found the will to live. The family relics displayed in his home's hallway, the Angelus foil, a sacred sword. Just by holding it, the tracking curse was cancelled. Because Lucas could control the curse's power, he was saved from that hell. Since that day, he's always kept the sacred sword close. Eventually, a portal to another dimension opened in the United Kingdom, and the hunter Nishihara wanted to borrow the sword, but his father refused to protect him. As a result, Britain suffered heavy losses, and his family, the Coopers, lost all their status and power. After that, to master his powers, Lucas tried every possible method and learned that absorbing dark mana allowed him to better control his curse. But if he let his guard down, he would lose control. That's why the sword was always necessary. In the process, he met Michael, his family regained power, but the cost was high. Because when Michael discovered his abilities, he had him track people with similar powers. Lucas would then kill them and absorb their power through the curse. To his family, he said he had no other choice, and that was the excuse he used for a long time. His fear of being killed by Michael turned him into a coward. Back in the present, Lucas thinks the copy ability user might be Haruto and wonders what will happen if that power falls into Michael's hands. However, he wants to see it with his own eyes, so he stores the sacred sword in his inventory, and his infamous curse instantly activates. With it, his vision expands, and he can, in a way, perceive things more deeply. Upon seeing it with his own eyes, he no longer has any doubt that Haruto is, indeed, the user of the copy ability. Far from there, on a plane heading to Japan, Turner Miller travels with the intent to fight, defying the authorities of his country. His companion Richard asks if his master wants to go to Japan, why not take the warp route? He also asks if he really needs to take a private jet. But his master replies with another question, asking if he's forgotten the motto of the guild he belongs to. Richard says there's no way he'd forget, and recites the motto. The moment you let your guard down, danger will come suddenly. He also says he understands what his master means and claims he'll be more careful next time. Meanwhile, Turner thinks back to the disaster 15 years ago. He was just an ordinary hunter who almost died, but Nishihara saved him. Not long after, he received an ability from a transcendent being and instantly became one of the strongest hunters in the world. Along with that, Nishihara gave him an item before the disaster ended. And now, 15 years later, that dimensional piece has started to resonate. So Turner thinks that whatever is happening in Japan is likely what Nishihara feared back then. Back in Ginza, the subspace that Arez mentioned is about to open. Nana says this is definitely the right place, since there's a large concentration of people here. Fua asks what the response from the other guilds was. She says that Master Shinoda from the Great Guild agreed to help. He's neutralizing the contamination from the tree's pollution at the affected hospital. His guild members are handling the contamination from the tree that appeared in the northern district and are containing its spread. Meanwhile, Master Taikuchi from the Midas Guild is sending members to support various areas. He himself is waiting alone in Ginza, since he wants to be on standby in case of any kind of emergency from the subspace. Fua asks what the other local guilds are doing. Nana says they're protecting and guiding citizens who couldn't escape. He also asks why Haruto isn't there. Nanas replies that he's on a different mission. That makes Fua curious about this so-called mission. Nana says she's curious too, but she knows Haruto always pulls off something with a trick up his sleeve. Until a guy named Ikanaga Aoi, a junior of the protagonist, hears Nanas mention Haruto. He's helping with the loading, and his supervisor calls his attention, telling him to stop standing around and get back to work. Aoi returns to work, thinking there's no way it's the same Haruto he knows. After all, he hasn't seen him in a long time. Not far from there, in a shopping mall in the Ginza district, Sattoru is carrying some backpacks at the protagonist's request and says he's already tired. Moore says he's also close to his limit. Meanwhile, Haruto sees on his system that he doesn't have enough mana to use the collision sword again, and that frustrates him. Sattoru walks over saying that with a bag like this, they can store 100 items, and they have 13, so he asks how that's not enough. Moore also asks if Haruto will be able to stop this with what he already has. Haruto says maybe, even though it's not ideal, it's what he has to work with. Haruto thinks that one way or another, he needs the subspace. And no matter what happens, he'll do everything to copy it. Suddenly, they bump into Lucas, and Moore asks what he's doing there. Lucas simply tells Moore to be quiet. His interest is only in talking to Haruto. Moore asks why he's drawing his sword if he just wants to talk. Meanwhile, Haruto thinks he's heard the story of Master Kinosaki, who with a sacred sword was able to purify shadow mana, and he concludes this could be a good opportunity to copy that ability. Haruto charges forward, thinking that the level of his skill has risen a lot, so he probably doesn't need a specific condition to copy Lucas's ability. But before he can do it, Lucas reveals that he already knows about Haruto's abilities, so the protagonist wonders how Lucas found out. Without knowing the answer, he pretends not to understand, but Lucas doesn't care and goes in for the attack. He says there's no point pretending. He and his family risked everything for this moment. Using all his determination, he tries to strike the protagonist, but Haruto escapes through the shadows, which Lucas notices right away. and tells Haruto to be careful using shadow magic against him, since Lucas has light-based magic abilities. As he attacks, he lights up a large area, which blinds the protagonist's vision. Haruto feels the huge source of light hitting him and realizes that because of it, he's unable to move through the shadows. Sattoru is impressed, and more says it's thanks to the sacred sword. It can purify a wide area and block any use of shadow magic. Lucas says the fact that the protagonist uses so many different abilities is because he copied them, including shadow magic. The protagonist tries not to show weakness, but he knows that not being able to move through shadows is going to make things harder for him, and he tries to think of a way to get around the situation. In turn, Lucas says the reason he's there is exactly because of the protagonist's copy ability, and tells Haruto he should learn to control skills without copying them. Haruto says that the fact Lucas knows so much about this means he's also cursed, and asks if that's why he teamed up with Takumi. Lucas becomes furious and doesn't like being compared to trash like Takumi, so he attacks the protagonist and lands a direct hit with his sword. However, Lucas notices something different, since Haruto let himself be struck and tries to copy the sword's ability. But his system warns that by doing so, he'll permanently lose the ability to move through shadows, so Haruto pulls back. He didn't expect that and assumed everything would be fine as long as he didn't use both abilities at once. So he heals himself and tries to think of a new strategy to break the stalemate. Lucas asks the protagonist what he plans to do with his copy ability from now on. Haruto replies that he plans to use his ability to become stronger and even surpass a transcendental. His opponent finds that to be too small of a motivation. The protagonist says that even before becoming a hunter, time was never on his side because of the curse. But he realizes that Lucas has no idea what he's hearing, and says that only 5 years remain until the catastrophe. Lucas thinks he was hit with so much information that he didn't have time to focus, and wonders if the hourglass is counting down to the next great disaster. The protagonist's system alerts him that the time to accept the copy has passed, and he'll have to try again if he wants to succeed. So he decides, and concludes that he will make the exchange. He just needs to touch the target one more time. But as he looks up at Tokyo, he realizes something is happening. Sattoru and more also see that the disaster is already beginning, and the rift to the other dimension is opening. Even Lucas knows that once the subspace opens, a contaminated zone will be designated, and within it, the power of hunters will be reduced and restricted. In Shinagawa, moments before the subspace opens, every hunter system alerts them that there will be restrictions on mana-based abilities and a reduction in powers. Takumi sees this and says that once the subspace is open, Tokyo will become hell on earth and the mission will be complete. However, someone hears him and says they won't let that happen. Takumi doesn't even see where it comes from but is hit directly. Beside Arez, Ku appears and says he'll defeat Takumi right there. Takumi says he was already expecting his arrival but claims it's too late now, as the barrier is complete and Tokyo is about to be destroyed. But Ku says nothing else matters, he just wants to destroy his target. He also says that the restriction didn't affect his dark mana, but Takumi says he's not the only one, and tells Ku that he'll show him the true power of dark mana. While they fight, other hunters scattered across the city receive the alert and grow concerned about the reduction in their abilities, as this has never happened before. Some even realize firsthand that they've gotten weaker. Not only abilities, but potions and items have also become weaker, and for some, that's practically a fatal weakness. Even Nanis becomes worried, and Fua says they don't have time to complain, because at any moment, powerful monsters could appear. It doesn't take long for portals to appear throughout the city, and from them emerge several catastrophes. But not only that, because from one specific portal, someone appears. Nanis looks and is startled. Even Fua, who tries to hide it, is visibly worried about the situation. From afar, a mysterious figure can be seen by everyone, and we see that it's the Elf Midsell. Some hunters wonder why an elf came out of a subspace portal. However, just as Fua predicted, giant and powerful monsters come out of the portal, frightening the more inexperienced hunters. Midsell says it's been a while. Things have been boring for the last 15 years, so today she wants to go as crazy as she sees fit. Soon the monsters charge into battle. Not far from there, Hu was already prepared for what was coming. Upon seeing the monsters approach, he says that numbers and debuffs won't stop him, and he doesn't like being underestimated. After that, he activates his stone armor, and is about to be attacked by one of the enemies. But Gu shows them his strength, which even reduced is still a match for those monsters. He fights them evenly, since his armor doesn't need mana to be activated. Even though the number of monsters is large, Gu is willing to fight, believing he'll take them all down, and that's exactly what he does when he attacks. He shows the enemies his full strength. Even the hunters in his own guild are impressed. While their leader fights the larger monsters, they're left to handle the smaller ones. Meanwhile, Nanis is also fighting monsters. Using her speed, she defeats them with relative ease, but she's not doing this alone, because Master Fua is also present. He faces a giant ogre head-on, and activates his magic shield. When he's struck, the enemy's attack is completely blocked. But Fuwa's shield isn't just for defense, he also uses it to attack. By doing so, he splits the giant ogre in half, but he doesn't just defeat one, he takes down several enemies at once. Nana sees this and thinks Fuwa's shield acts as both sword and shield. It's powerful enough even without using any abilities, so she wants to lead the president and Master Takeuchi to deal with the bigger monsters. But for the rest of the hunters, their combat abilities have dropped significantly due to the debuff. No matter how many monsters are defeated, it seems endless. She concludes that if this continues, even with support, things could get difficult. Until she herself is attacked, Nanas manages to dodge the enemy, but she realizes it's not just any monster. It's a griffin, a final boss class monster. A griffin isn't all that strong by itself, but its fire breath is the real danger. Nanas knows it won't stop until its target is completely incinerated. With recovery abilities blocked, if it targets any hunter, they'll be taken out in a single strike. She concludes she has to stop it before it unleashes its fire breath. Back at the protagonist's side, he and the others are shocked by what they see, since the attribute reduction and debuff info reached them too. Moore says this might be caused by a field dungeon boss. It's an extremely rare occurrence, but he wonders why target mana abilities specifically. That's so underhanded, and he questions where Kurosaki got such a twisted idea. The protagonist tells Lucas that now's not the time for him, and before they can do anything, dragons attack them. They start running, and Moore says it'll be a nightmare if the dragons start spreading. They don't have the luxury of wasting time. Lucas runs alongside the protagonist, and Haruto says they'll talk later. There's no time now. But seeing that Lucas doesn't respond, Haruto becomes uneasy, since just moments ago he wouldn't stop talking, and he still blames him for everything that's happening. Meanwhile, Lucas thinks that Haruto hasn't used his copy ability yet, and wonders if he should report that to Lord Michael. Lucas says he has no idea what Haruto has prepared, but asks what would happen if he used it now. The protagonist says he'd love to, but there's a specific order to these things. First, he wants to level up on simpler ground monsters. Back to Nanas, she thinks she's too slow, and the griffin ends up using its fire breath. But at this pace, she believes she can push through. Even if she takes some damage from the hellfire, she believes she'll win. However, the griffin's fire is far more intense than she imagined. Realizing this, she stops. But Fuwa appears to help, and defends her with his shield. Nanas asks why he left his position, but Fuwa says there's no time for that. He simply tells her to cut off the monster's head while he handles the fire. She understands the plan and agrees to follow it. With that, Nanas moves around the fire and charges toward the enemy, but the griffin notices her movement and spits even more fire. Nanas, in turn, waits for the right moment and leaps over the flames, heading straight for the griffin's head, and strikes it with her spear. However, to avoid losing its head, the griffin deliberately redirects the blow to another part of its body. Right after, it attacks Nanas with its claw. She defends herself as best as she can, stopping the enemy with her weapon, but now she's cornered and about to be hit by fire. However, before the griffin attacks, it notices something and retreats into the air. Fuwa approaches with his shield, asking Nanas if she's alright. She says yes and thanks him. Fuwa says he tried to help, but thinks he might have made things worse, since now the enemy is on high alert and probably won't land anytime soon. If he throws his giant shield and the griffin dodges, it's game over. Fuwa realizes the griffin is going to take advantage of being in the air and shoot a fireball, and tells Nanas to get behind him. But although she's grateful, she says she has other plans, and simply tells him to throw his shield at the enemy. Fuwa acts as instructed, allowing Nanas to use the shield to get close to the enemy. That way, she manages to get close enough to strike the griffin, and finally cut off its head. With the plan successful, she lands safely, and the enemy is finally defeated. But Nanas notices that contaminated mana is being released from the creature's body and spreading into the air. Not only that, but other monsters could end up doing the same. In other words, the more they're defeated, the more dangerous it becomes for the hunters. Speaking of them, some are facing an armored enemy, but due to the attribute reduction, they're struggling, until the group's mage plays a card he was saving for situations like this, and with a scroll, he manages to split the enemy in half, armor and all, although that ability could only be used once. His teammates praise his performance, but the mage says they have nothing left to use now. Their problems worsen when one team member begins to feel sick. After defeating the enemy, its body released contaminated mana, and it began to affect them. In a short time, the entire team was poisoned. When the mage realizes the problem, it's already too late. To make matters worse, the elf approaches them and says all subspace monsters are contaminated. So as soon as they die, the air around them becomes polluted, affecting anyone nearby and putting the defenders in even greater trouble. Ironically, she says it's far too early to give up, since many of the monsters haven't even crossed through the subspace portal, and they're going to die one way or another. Ikanaga Aoi, The protagonist, Junior, who was among the team and got contaminated, already believes this is the end of the city and of himself. But someone appears and says it's not over yet. Haruto arrives with his teammates and says this is only the beginning of the battle. Upon seeing Haruto right in front of him, Aoi is left speechless. He stands up and asks how Haruto got there. The protagonist says it's been a while since they last saw each other, but for now, he just tells Aoi to drink this potion and everything will be fine. Aoi says Haruto can't stay there, it's dangerous, but the protagonist tells him not to worry about that. Soon the boy wonders if this really is the Haruto he knows. The group throws their backpacks to the ground, and the protagonist says that before anything else, he wants to deal with this debuff. After that, he gets to work and distributes mana to all allies present. The mana not only heals them, but also restores the attributes that were reduced. They're all impressed by the amount of power, until one of them recognizes Haruto, the guy known as the mana support in dungeons. Even Nanis and Fuwa, who are far away, receive that mana. The master realizes that the debuff was removed and wonders how that's possible. Moreover, he's impressed by the sheer amount of mana being distributed. Hunters from all sides receive the mana support and return to using their skills in battle. Meanwhile, Midsell also senses the mana, which even removed the debuff that had previously affected everyone. She is truly impressed by this, and upon seeing the protagonist, wonders if he is the one she's been searching for all this time. Although everyone's mana has been restored, many enemies are still attacking and causing trouble. Their numbers and strength are immeasurable, so much so that low-level hunters are having a hard time facing them. But one of them is surprised upon seeing the protagonist's team in action, and wonders why, instead of running away, they're charging straight toward danger. A horde of monsters lies just ahead. Sattoru says the monsters are way bigger up close, but Haruto reassures him, telling him to just empty the backpacks. So they all follow the plan and take everything out of their bags. Upon seeing this, some wonder what they're doing with those spheres in a situation as dangerous as this. On the other hand, the protagonist knows exactly what he's doing, since those spheres are golem cores. Unlike him, Nanis doesn't know what those spheres are. And not just her, Lucas is also confused, wondering what the protagonist is planning. Haruto wastes no time and turns the cores into small gulps, just like he did before. With that, he forms his own army of stone golems. Nanis then realizes that the spheres were actually cores, like the ones they found in the dungeon, but they are not easy to obtain, which surprises her. The monsters don't stop. They group up and attack. They even manage to destroy some of the golems, which makes some people think the protagonist's plan is about to fail. But the golems surprise everyone by showing they can regenerate. Not only that, but they also know how to fight, and they group up against the monsters too. This way, they gain an advantage over the enemies, because even though they are small, they are numerous, and they hold the upper hand against the monsters, showing the hunters what they are capable of. After that, some get excited and join them in battle. Sattoru says he will fight too, and alongside him, Moore also wants to go. Meanwhile, the protagonist focuses only on the levels he's gaining, since the golem's victories count toward his own. He realizes the range of what he can share has expanded significantly, and now he can give specific instructions too. Not only that, but he's evolved his golem control so much that he can now transform them at will. With that, the protagonist dismantles the smaller golems, transforming them into a larger and stronger creature. Now Haruto has what he needs to fight the wyverns. He uses the golems to build his own stone dragon, which upon appearing, roars fiercely, showing it's a match for his enemies. The hunters are left speechless after witnessing what the protagonist just did, as they'd never seen anything like it before. On the other side, the enemies attack and breathe fire, but Haruto's golem dragon doesn't run from the fight. When hit by the enemy's fire, the protagonist's golem loses flight stability and ends up vulnerable to the enemy, which allows it to be attacked. As it crashes to the ground, the golem shatters, something that leaves the allies a bit shaken. Haruto had already anticipated something like this, knowing this battle wouldn't be easy, so he decides to try another tactic. He uses the stones to create smaller, but numerous dragon golems. The hunters notice the change in strategy. Not only that, but they also see that now the protagonist's golems are dying more quickly. Once again, the enemy uses its fire against them. Nanis thinks that even though they changed size, the end result is the same. But this time, the situation is not like before, because the golems find a way around the fire problem, spinning around them, creating a vortex of flames. And by doing this, the fire loses its strength. This way, the enemy loses its greatest weapon, getting hit from all different directions, turning into a shredded mess of flesh. Just like high-caliber bullets, the golems hit them, taking down all the dragons. Once that's done, they prevail. Only the golems remain in the sky, and with that, the protagonist evolves again, gaining more points than before. The hunters notice how effective the protagonist's work is and realize the airspace is now clear. But on the ground, there are still monsters advancing, and Nanis leads the cleanup troops. Since he already defeated all the enemies in the sky, Haruto now wants to help with the ground battle, and he's fully ready for what he calls the hunt. We see that Gu is still fighting some monsters alone, and he's actually doing quite well, until one of the protagonist's golems approaches, which catches his attention, because he knows Haruto is behind it, and in a way, he finds it useful. But his surprise grows when one of the golems jumps and grabs onto him unexpectedly. Gu doesn't understand why this is happening, until Sattoru walks up and explains that the golems are using the same stone armor as Master Takeuchi, so they see him as an ally. Gu asks if Sattoru is using a golem as a shield. The boy says yes, and reveals it was a gift from Haruto, and he's trying to evolve it into an armor, just like Master Gu does. But Gu thinks this is totally different from what he does, and doesn't like being compared to what he calls weak creatures. To prove his point, he intensifies his attacks, being more brutal with the enemies. Soon, Sattoru realizes he made him angry, but says it wasn't his intention. Nearby, Lucas approaches the corpses of the fallen dragons. He realizes this was only possible because the protagonist evolved his ability and improved the golem control method, witnessing his power. So he concludes this is beyond his comprehension and the evolution of curses. He wonders what would happen if Michael gained this power. After that, someone calls out to him. The protagonist approaches and asks who opened the subspace from the other side. Lucas says he's taking a risk, and everything his family has is on the line. So he asks if Haruto really thinks he would betray them. Haruto knows that Lucas doesn't want to do this because from the moment he faced him until now, he has shown resistance to all of it. He also knows that Lucas is worried about something, and that it's been bothering him. He asks if opening the subspace only benefits the guilty, and says he also knows Lucas isn't aware of everything. Until Lucas says the real chaos hasn't even begun yet, and right after, the ground starts to move. From it emerge several roots of the contaminated tree, which even separate the two. Haruto gets trapped, and Lucas manages to escape. He knows the elf is involved in this, and if those contaminated branches catch him, the mana poisoning will accelerate twice as fast, especially if Midsell is using her abilities. So things aren't looking good. He thinks maybe this will pull him out of the subspace, and her abilities might conflict with his sacred sword. Lucas considers using brilliance to purify the place, until he's stopped and asks what's happening now. The roots grab Lucas by the arm, preventing him from using the sword, which throws him into despair. Lucas tries his best to escape, but the roots keep growing more and more. Some hunters encounter the roots, and Nanast arrives shortly after, telling them never to get complacent and that they must keep moving. She thinks whoever is controlling this must be nearby, until Nanast sees the elf and concludes she was right, but wonders why an elf is in this dimension. The story cuts to Takumi, who is fighting Ku. Takumi says there's a way to use dark mana. You must overcome the addiction to it and touch the abyss beyond it, becoming able to control the full power. Who in a way understands what his opponent is saying. In any case, he is attacked right after, and when he uses his magical protection barrier, he realizes that his opponent's sword pierced through the shield, something that doesn't normally happen, and it catches him off guard, until he wonders if there is a way to survive dark mana, because if there is, his brother might have survived, and that distracts him a bit. Takumi says he doesn't know what Ku is thinking, but claims it's not something just anyone can do, because when someone has dark abilities, they absorb dark mana. Arez approaches and sees how strong Takumi is. Ku says the enemy may have absorbed his dark lightning. Without giving the two any time to think, Takumi attacks them. They manage to dodge the strike, but the energy force is so strong that as it passes by them, it hits a building and nearly brings it down. Ku becomes concerned upon seeing this. Takumi says that all his opponent's abilities have become useless against him and moves in for a close-range attack, but he is prevented from proceeding because Arez is offering support, and Ku asks if she casts the debuff. Arez says no. She suspects Haruto is responsible and thinks it's possible he's supplying infinite mana. She also says she's using about half her original power, but that seems to be enough to slow the enemy down a bit. Takumi hears them mention infinite mana and concludes it's the guy from earlier, so he channels his dark mana to break free from Arez's trap. She quickly realizes she was right about his powers. Even so, she tries to restrain the enemy once again. Takumi, in turn, says it doesn't matter how many times she tries, the result will always be the same. After that, he charges in for an attack, and says not to underestimate him. After all, he is the master of the Blood Tower Guild. Arez finds herself in an unusual situation. She prepares for the attack, doubling her magical protection. Takumi notices she's using regular mana and says that if she doesn't know yet, he'll educate her. He then mentions that dark mana absorbs regular mana and becomes even stronger. With that, he manages to break through Arez's magical barrier. She then tries to think of another alternative. So Arez pulls out a magic scroll, and with it, summons a new barrier. Takumi finds it amusing, using sarcasm to say that the path she chose is splendid, and states that just like before, he'll break through this barrier with ease. Arez falls into despair upon seeing that none of her force fields are working, and just as she was about to be attacked, Who appears in front of her, protecting her. He takes advantage of being face-to-face with Takumi, and uses his magic to counterattack. Takumi is caught by surprise, being thrown back after getting hit. Now Arez takes advantage of this opening and once again tries to trap him in a magical snare.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.